This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10, and Matt raises a very valid point. If you do forget to tell us whatever it was you were teasing before the news, James, how will we know whether it's due to embarrassment or your memory? The valid point Matt makes, of course, is that I do find myself promising to reveal something to you after trying to build up tension in increasingly pantomimic fashion and then forgetting, even with the ministrations of my colleagues who are charged with trying to remind me. But I have remembered this. I have not forgotten this. And I am embarrassed to explain something to you. There's always a chance that I could be wrong. I don't think I am on this one. But there will be a number of reasons why the British media, particularly the print media, but, you know, where print leads, broadcast often follows. In fact, that'll be relevant to the question I'm moving you towards now. The environment, ecosystem is the word I think I most like. An ecosystem is created. You could call it context, in which objectivity is impossible. The feelings that a population have been encouraged to have, if you like, mean that the very nature of reality is it's by definition skewed. I'm getting a bit philosophical. Let me steer you back to what we're actually talking about. There are a number of reasons why the UK print media, why British newspapers, not the force they were, but still obviously powerful and influential, have gone after Prince Harry and his wife with, I would argue, unprecedented venom. The kind of vitriol and bile that would normally be reserved for child abusers and serial killers. The sheer scale of the coverage, the hyperbole, the hysteria, the utterly vicious reportage is born of more than one motive. Some of it is class-based. I haven't got to the bottom of this theory, but for the idea that somebody born very close to the very pinnacle, about as close as you can get without being at the top of it or guaranteed to get to the very top of it one day, someone born about as close as you can get to the pinnacle of our social structures, our class system, to turn around and say, up to a point, I want nothing to do with it, I find it ridiculous. That sends an implicit insult to absolutely everybody who believes in forelock tugging, who believes in cap doffing, who believes in deference, who believes in any of the systems and inequalities that hold our entire society together. Okay, so when someone at the top of it calls it out, you've got to chop them off at the knees. It's fine. Someone near the bottom of it, or even someone halfway up. You can call someone halfway up, oh, he's just a champagne socialist. You can ignore him. Someone at the bottom of it, oh, it's just the politics of envy. You can ignore him. But if someone at the top of it comes close to rendering the entire pyramid ridiculous, you've got to kill him. Metaphorically, these days, literally. In olden days. So that's part of it. Part of it, of course, is linked to class. Class and race are always linked, and the fact that he fell in love with a mixed-race woman is unforgivable in many quarters. In fact, oddly, the higher up that pyramid you go, the more likely you are sometimes to encounter people who don't think that the royal bloodline or the aristocratic bloodline should be admitting genes like Meghan Markle. So you've got that motivation for it as well. And the thing I'm embarrassed about, I think, is probably the size of the third point, which only really came crashing home to me yesterday. And of course, I'll tell you why it hit me hard today. The Daily Telegraph, which, as you know, has recently become a byword for media hysteria and arrant nonsense. The Daily Telegraph covers yesterday's High Court results, which, if you weren't listening yesterday, is best understood as an epic defeat for Rupert Murdoch's news group newspapers, with a little bit of wriggle room for them, because they succeeded in making some of the allegations and accusations go away untested in court by essentially owning up to the biggest accusation of all, which is that they broke the law while invading Prince Harry's privacy. So it's not a perfect analogy, but I think it might be helpful to some people either pretending or professing not to understand what happened yesterday. You don't continue a case after the accused has pleaded guilty. That's the best. It's not a perfect analogy because there are differences between criminal and civil claims, and there are distinctions between the major and minor accusations. But I'm not a lawyer, but I've spoken to a few. The best way to understand it, I think, is to see it as a case where the accused has pleaded guilty to the main charge, and therefore all the other charges are not significant enough to justify the 10-week trial that would follow. Particularly, of course, when you've got the prospect of the plaintiff, in this case Prince Harry, having to pay over £10 million, it's estimated, in the event of actually winning. I'll say that again. He'd have to pay over £10 million to the other side, even if he won. So those are the facts of it. You read the Daily Telegraph this morning. Harry climbs down after 8-figure payout. And then you're encouraged to turn to pages 4 and 5, no less. So two huge spreads across the broadsheet, the only really full-size broadsheet left in the business. How Prince Harry's crusade to change the media landscape fell flat. And one of the most ridiculous pieces I've ever seen in my life, masquerading as journalism, appears under the headline, "Duke has become the person he claimed to hate." Fantastic. And another one, I mean, they can't get enough. It's 2 full pages. Meghan and the money. Are these the real reasons that our lost royal has finally settled? ? All of these questions are easily answered with that very simple analogy that they have owned up to breaking the law. They've agreed to give him about 10 million quid, and they've essentially admitted the major accusation, which makes the likelihood or the wisdom or even the feasibility of continuing the rest of the case close to impossible. But you wouldn't know that from much of the coverage today. And the Telegraph is the one that has focused my mind. The Telegraph, I need to tell you, because if you were to approach this coverage with even a cursory understanding of the facts, you could be forgiven for thinking that someone had spiked your drink with magic mushrooms or ketamine. And what you need to understand why the Telegraph has done this is just a very basic knowledge of the curriculum vitae of the editor of the Daily Telegraph. So, a man called Tony Gallagher used to go jogging. You may have seen photographs of him out jogging with Boris Johnson. Such is his impartiality and determination to tread a political course. Guess what he has done previously? Guess what his previous jobs involve? You ready? Yeah, he has edited The Sun. Oh, Tony Gallagher's at the Times now. A former Daily Telegraph editor has edited The Sun and has been a deputy editor of the Daily Mail. So the tiny number of people who are creating this environment in which Prince Harry is public enemy number one are constantly swapping jobs and interchanging. So you've got the Telegraph going absolutely bonkers. You've got the Times, now edited by a man who used to edit the Telegraph and be deputy editor of the Daily Mail, going absolutely bonkers. And why? Well, because he's brought down newsgroup newspapers, and next year he's poised to come after the Mail. Indeed, as Mark points out. Message for James from Maida Vale. Guess what? Front page of today's Times, nothing about Prince Harry and the Sun. It's a quarter page on page 12. I wonder why. Under Tony Gallagher, the Times has become a Daily Mail for posh boys. 12 minutes after 10 is the time. And this is the point I have missed. The environment in which the Metropolitan Police are now being asked to investigate or to prosecute some of the people adjacent to yesterday's court admissions, some of the people involved in newsgroup newspapers' conduct over the relevant period. The environment in which the Metropolitan Police is being asked to investigate or prosecute those people or to pursue those accusations further, the dossier that Tom Watson is poised to hand over to the Metropolitan Police, the ecosystem is the one in which Prince Harry is public enemy number one. So I say this cautiously, and I say it pessimistically, and I say it reluctantly. I don't think that there will be any further criminal investigation, despite the fact that there has been an admission of law breaking. And the reason for that, well, I'm going to ask you, but the reason for that is, well, there are a few reasons for that. I don't know that you could persuade public opinion, if public opinion matters in this case, that this would be a correct prioritization of police forces. And I think, and I may be overthinking this one, but I think that that is because Prince Harry's position in the public feeling, as reflected by newspapers, I don't think it necessarily reflects reality, but as reflected by the British media, there's no sympathy for the man. There's not sufficient sympathy to generate a sense that this absolutely has to be investigated. This absolutely has to be investigated. And I'm also embarrassed. So I'm embarrassed by the fact I didn't realise that. I've sat here comparing coverage of Meghan Markle with coverage of Kate Middleton, feeling sort of 20%, 30% baffled as to why it's so vicious and so different. How anyone can write an article about two women undertaking exactly the same behaviour. Exactly the same behaviour. And one of them gets written about in the language of serial killers and psychopaths, and one of them gets written about in the language of fairy tale princesses. I may remind you of some of the examples. Exactly the same behaviour being written about in two such completely different ways. But the newspapers, which, as I've demonstrated to you, are essentially controlled, well, they're owned by a tiny portion of the plutocrat population, but they have been for many years now, since Rupert Murdoch essentially began to exert his stranglehold on the UK plurality, the plurality of the UK media, with the help, of course, of Margaret Thatcher. It's all in my book. You have a tiny cabal of men and women who control almost all newspaper coverage, and from newspaper coverage comes so much of the public opinion and the broadcasting editorial slants. I rely on newspapers to decide what I'm going to talk to you about most days. And so my theory at this point is that they have done a lot of what they've done in order to create the atmosphere. It's why the Telegraph is particularly pertinent today. They've done all of this to create an atmosphere in which Prince Harry's calls for further investigation, Tom Watson's appeal to the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, will fall on deaf ears. There won't be that groundswell of opinion, that groundswell of public feeling that you would expect to happen when it turns out that a boy was barely out of short trousers when people on Murdoch's payroll started breaking the law to invade his privacy. It should, by rights, outrage and upset everyone. But if you live in a country where people are paid to write articles about how he hasn't won at all, then you know that the ecosystem is being primed, is being groomed, if you like. The population is being groomed to let this epic malfeasance and illegality, unlawfulness, to let it go, to let it slide. How better to ensure that you don't have to answer, or your mates or your colleagues or don't have to answer for their actions, than to make the victim of the crime persona non grata. Is that tinfoil? Is that a bit tinfoil hat? Maybe they just went after Meghan Markle because she is absolutely awful and evil, and there's so much evidence to. Oh, no, that doesn't work. Maybe they just decided. Well, I suppose in the spirit of Occam's razor, you'd have to come up with another reason why they were so determined to turn Prince Harry and his wife into public enemies that they had little choice in the end but to leave the entire country. Such was the scale of the vitriol being hurled at them, with or without the connivance of people that they felt they could have expected more from. So the question really is whether or not you think the police, well, there's more than one question, isn't there? Do you think that this unlawful activity should be further investigated? Do you think the police should now get involved with some of the allegations that could not come to court? 0345 6060 973. Do you think this should be a police matter? And the second question is an analysis of my analysis. Is this a penny drop moment for you? Are you sitting there as I am this morning going, oh boy, That's why they did it. The race was part of it. The class was part of it. I mean, for me, it was the military service, the genuine, full frontline military service. The footage of him at Camp Bastion being interviewed and having to tear off his microphone and run towards the helicopter. And that the idea that he could be turned into someone that your average schmo considers to be contemptible. These ludicrous lines that not wanting to have your phone hacked somehow, in the event of you also giving an interview or writing an autobiography, somehow makes you a hypocrite. So everybody that's ever shared any information about themselves or their family is apparently ripe for illegal activity, illegal invasions of... I mean, look, the contortions of people trying to defend this are simultaneously contemptible and ridiculous, important and meaningless. But the question of whether or not this should go further is one that I'd like you to have a go at answering. And if you don't want it to, tell me why. 0345 6060 973. Here's Lynn to show you exactly what I mean. She says, let's get this right. Catherine is lovely, kind, engaging with people, causing no trouble, fitting into her role nicely. Meghan is selfish, greedy. She caused problems. She's a controlling psychopath. Please, please, please stop trying to make Meghan into a saint. I am black, and it's not her race that is an issue. So, two people that Lynn has never met, has no personal knowledge of whatsoever, will never encounter, and has never spoken to. She knows enough about them to conclude that one of them is lovely, kind, and close to perfect, while one of them is a greedy, controlling psychopath. And the question that the British population is being obliquely asked today is whether the greedy, controlling psychopath's husband should actually have appalling offences allegedly committed against him, further investigated by the British police. So if you've even come within within a millimetre of the British media over the last 20 years, you're going to be a hell of a lot closer to Lynn's position than you are to the idea that these allegations are serious enough and strong enough to merit further investigation. So, question number one. Do you think that the police should now get involved? 0345 6060 973. Caveat number one. I don't know that people who haven't listened to this programme or read maybe one or two articles published today in a sea of nonsense. I don't know whether anyone else is actually qualified properly to answer this question. Incredible, really. But do you think the police should get involved? And second question, is this the missing piece of the jigsaw? Is the absolutely incredible campaign of hatred and abuse now perfectly understandable as a backdrop against which police action against the people who broke the law in the breach of Prince Harry's privacy have their cases further examined or have the allegations against them further pursued or prosecuted? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Come at it from any angle you want, but I'm not sure. Well, I think this is fascinating. And my job, of course, is to make you understand why you should too.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I want to just say a word before I go to Andrew and to Kay about that notion of ecosystem. I'm going to use a really odd example, gilts. All right? Do you remember, was it a week and a half ago? Gilts were everywhere. The story of gilts, Rachel Reeves, is absolutely appalling that gilts have gone up, and most people probably don't know what that means, but we know it's not good. Liz Truss was claiming somehow that what was happening was worse than what happened when she tanked the economy. Have we had a legal letter yet about that? And then they went down again, went down really far. How much reporting has that received? Not just from the newspapers, but also from broadcasters who rely upon newspapers to test the water, to get a feeling for what matters and what doesn't. And I'm guilty of this. I mean, I didn't go in big on the gilts the first time around because I kind of thought that this was a swings and roundabouts story. But the people who did, the people who were using the gilt story to tell you that Rachel Reeves was derelict, that Rachel Reeves was delinquent, that Rachel Reeves was disastrous, why didn't they then tell you when the gilts market completely reversed again? Well, you must ask them that question. But that's what I mean by ecosystem. So the idea is created by the way a story is covered that somebody is dodgy, in this case Rachel Reeves. Now, swap her out for Prince Harry and tell me how dodgy he is in the minds of many people, groomed and very carefully gaslit by the UK media. Andrew's in Lanark on the question of pursuit and prosecution. Andrew, what would you like to say?
Hiya, mate. Your researcher asked me to be specific at the beginning of this and say that my background is, and I'm not saying this to try and make myself any cleverer than anybody else. I'm a former police officer and I'm a former soldier.
Okay.
And I was in the same corps as Harry. I was in the Armoured Corps. He was a reconnaissance tank soldier. I was a heavy track tank soldier. So we've walked on the same stuff. Okay. So the first thing, the question that you asked was, should it be investigated? Absolutely, 100% yes.
Why? Now, I'm going to say to you what I would expect somebody else to say. Okay. The police have got much more important things to worry about.
Right. The answer to that statement is that they have got much more important things to worry about. Where do you draw the line? It's like nobody turns up for shoplifters anymore. Yeah. And look what happened there. That in a way that works against you. I won't badger the witness, Andrew. I'll let you speak after this. But in a way, I'm more interested in shoplifters and sex offenders than I am in journalists and private investigators who, in the latter case, definitely breached his privacy by breaking the law, and in the former case, I'd quite like them to pursue. Did you see what I mean? Does the average bloke in the street or woman in the street think that this is important enough to merit the man hours and the police time? I think that'll probably depend on where their allegiances lie in regards to the personalities involved, and which is another issue. That's a second question. I'll come to that in a minute. As far as why should they investigate it and why should people care, it's the fabric of our society. It's the law, and it's sometimes certain things. I used to say to my kids when they were growing up, and they say, "Well, that's not fair, Dad," and I would say, "Well, that's the way things are. The sky's blue, the grass is green, and water's wet, and that's that.
And life's unfair.
And life is unfair. Get used to it. Don't you know?
Do you know you've done a better job than me? I'm going to add that question to my my inquiry this morning. If you want to ring in and explain to people who don't care, or to people who don't think the police should get involved, why they are wrong, why they should care more, then 0345 6060 is the number you need. It's because of the scale of the wrongdoing.
So the first question is, I'm confident in what I think. Some people will disagree with me. I'm confident. What really makes me struggle is, personally, on a very personal level, is the second question about the way that Harry and Meghan have been treated. And there are obvious reasons. There's the class thing. There's the race thing. 100% the race thing. I just don't get it. Why? What is it that? Why do people? Surely somebody. I don't buy newspapers. I get my news from people like you and off the television.
Yes.
But I understand you use the papers. They're your initial researchers because that's what people are reading. That's what they want to hear being talked about. But who cares? About this stuff. And then the fantastic example was that you gave was that they reported the flowers at the wedding, the bridesmaids' flowers, and the way that was reported. I was like, I understand that we can stamp down on papers and say, right, stick to the facts, but that's not about a factual thing. They're using facts, but it's their interpretation of those facts that they get away with it. And I don't understand why they do it.
Well, do you understand now? Do you? I mean, I appreciate that you don't read these outlets, read these papers, but I can with a very cursory Google, I can find a claim by a retired commanding officer, and this is reported by the BBC, accusing Prince Harry of having turned against his military family after having trashed his birth family. And the Daily, that's the BBC reporting that because of the ecosystem that's being created. So when you say you don't understand, do you understand now, or do you see some sense in my cautious theory that they've created an ecosystem in which the likelihood of pursuit, investigation and possible prosecution has been reduced to about as low a level as the guilty people could possibly hope?
Yeah, I understand that, and I understand how it's happened, but I don't understand that senior officer to turn around and say that Harry's turned his back on his military family.
I'm in touch. I left the military in 1994, and I felt 30 years ago. And I speak to the guys via social media, a little group that we've got, or a couple of groups, on a daily basis. And I know in my heart that he's in touch with guys who he served with.
And you see it with the Invictus Games as well. You see his commitment to the cause of personnel, comrades injured in the military. 10:31 is the time. Thank you, Andrew. It's a lovely start. And you add a question to the list. Tell someone who doesn't care why they should. And I mean that quite sincerely. Why should people care? This bloke, he's rich. He's walking away with 10 million quid. He lives in California. He's got everything he's ever dreamt of in the context of love and happiness and family. He was appallingly treated over a period of 15 years from an incredibly young age by some of the most powerful people in the world. He wasn't protected by family or by institutions that you might have expected to protect him a little bit better, but he's got the victory, he's got the apology. All right, some of the mates, colleagues and closest friends of the allegedly guilty people are going to pretend that it hasn't gone that way at all, but he knows it did. So why does he need to have prosecutions and pursuits, criminal pursuits as well? Explain to somebody who doesn't care why they should care. Quick shout to Paul, who's been in touch, to ask, are we having mini roast or wedges with the pucker? Someone's having pie for tea. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:35. Let me be absolutely clear that this is not Idiot's Corner territory. Not quite knowing what's gone on here is absolutely normal. And I don't know whether any of us really do, but you know how fond I am of analogies. So one way to understand why the case hasn't gone to court is with a footballing analogy. Imagine it was next goal wins, or golden goal, we call it, don't we? Imagine it was golden goal, and Prince Harry scored. At which point the referee says it's over. You have won. You have achieved, in the context of the allegations that the court was set to examine, you have achieved the biggest result, the main result, the victory, in a way that could not be superseded by a 10-week court case. Do you see what I mean? The main allegation of unlawful activity has been admitted by the other side. It's 1-0, but it's also golden goal. So if you want to carry on, because you know that a 10-0 victory will be even more resounding and will remove even more of the doubts about the quality of your team or the quality of your case or the quality of your victory, you just can't continue. So I'm not 100% clear on whether or not that's an actual guillotine, but it will certainly be the judge's view. You have already achieved the most you could hope to achieve, the threshold over which none of the other stuff would get. So if you manage to get, after a court case, verdicts on all of the other things as well, none of it would overtake the result that you've already got with the admission of unlawful activity. So even that's confused and confusing. But why should people care about these crimes, these unlawful activities, these people, to the point where they want the police to get involved? 0345 6060 973. Alison is in Belfast. Alison, what would you like to say?
Well, I was delighted when I first came across the news yesterday. Guilty pleasure, flicked Mail Online open, saw the news. No, actually, I think I heard it on your programme, and then I flicked open the Mail Online to see what the commentators were saying. And to a man, all the commentators on the article were slagging off Harry and Meghan and saying he said he wouldn't settle, and now he's settled, and writing off what I heard of as an absolutely fabulous victory against the Murdoch press. And the reason I think it matters, and the reason I would like to see it taken very seriously in this country, not alone by the police, but potentially also by Parliament and Leveson too, is that Murdoch and his ilk demonstrate a complete absence of integrity in the British press. And they've made it their money-making activity to make the news rather than
or 50% money making, 50% influence peddling. It's because quite a lot of these organs lose money, so it's as much about having the ear of prime ministers and having power over politics as it is about the bottom line. You see that on both sides of the Atlantic, of course.
The reason I mentioned money making is I recall some of the conversations that went on when Murdoch was up against his own children in California trying to rearrange the inheritance path that was laid down in the trust. And the reason he expressed that he wanted to ensure that Lachlan would be at the head of news group was to ensure a more right-wing editorial style because it made more money for the group. So it's not... I mean, that's the core motivation.
I'm just wondering how many people have just heard that for the first time. Yes, you're absolutely right. It came out in court. The reason why he wants to anoint one child over all of the others is because that child has bought in either to the ideology or to the economic reality that there's more money in promoting far-right adjacent rhetoric, as Fox News has taught them, than there is in any other mode of journalism in this
exactly.
In this
so
world.
It's not actually therefore any longer journalism, as I learned what journalism was much earlier in my life. It's a completely different product altogether, and I fear that we're absolutely missing good quality journalism in the UK, and I think we therefore do need the essential civic organs and the organs of state to address that issue, because otherwise so many people, like those people reading the Daily Mail online yesterday and commenting, are just being turned into consumers of this.
And of course there'll be social media will be full of similar bilge and quite possibly worse, and broadcasters will be joining in as well. Always worth checking which people offering an opinion in the public space have worked for Rupert Murdoch and for how long, and whether or not relations remain warm. But here's a question, Alison. In the context of media, does it matter? Because the newspapers are dying. They won't be engaging in this kind of behaviour anymore. I will not be surprised, and Private Eye's very good on this week, if Harry and his wife now get a much easier ride from certainly the Murdoch titles. The case against the Mail, of course, is still outstanding. But going after them for the unlawful activity doesn't matter, because they are not the force they were when they did it. Look at Twitter now. Twitter, you can find anything on Twitter. You can find footage on Twitter of people waving at their grandmas, and that being cited as evidence that they do Hitler salutes as well. And Elon Musk is. So do you see what I mean? There are somewhat romantic idea of what the media represents and should be can be simultaneously true and redundant.
And also potentially described as death by 1,000 cuts, death of public decency, death of integrity, death of standards, really worth following in a country that does appear to be in a declining state. And everybody
for the first time today, 10:41, we have to mention the words Donald and Trump. As what happens to a country when that decline becomes complete, when that decline becomes unstoppable. Donald Trump now releasing people from jail who were attacking police officers on January the 6th and simultaneously claiming that the crimes and the offences were trivial. You create a world in which you can believe what you want to believe. Alison, thank you. A lot of people getting in touch to say that was a brilliant call. But also, and I quite like this, is Elon the new Murdoch? Well, yeah, in a way, but measurably worse. Bob, seeing the funny side, and it's always important to see the funny side. Your golden goal analogy is all very well, but these days we have VAR, so they can go back and review fouls and bad behaviour. Yeah, but you wouldn't change the result. This is the problem with my analogies. You've got to take them at face value and then leave them alone. Otherwise, we start digging into them, and distraction is inevitable. Thank you, Alison. Barry's in Edinburgh. Barry, what would you like to say?
James, I'm in complete agreement that it should be investigated, because we're told constantly no one is above the law.
Yes,
and if it's proved that the law has been broken, then it needs to be dealt with in the appropriate way. If it doesn't, then what kind of message does that send out? I've got personal experience of the son making up a lie about my family.
Okay.
Back in 1993. It was a major one. And so I know how these papers are. As far in my own opinion, the Sun should have been closed down a long time ago. because this
after Hillsborough, never mind phone hacking
Yeah. I'll give you a quick thing. My brother was in the army. He was shot in Ireland by the IRA. The headline, I think it was 2 days later, picture of my brother, and it said, "Heads you win, tails I die." And they run a story about how a coin was flipped between my brother and someone else to see who went out on patrol that day. It was a complete and utter lie.
What year was that?
That was 1993.
Did you receive any justice? Did you go through a process of complaint?
Not as far as that, no. But on a couple of days later, I turned up at my parents' house, and there was 2 reporters from the Sun there, and they said, "Can we have a quick ad?" And I told them in no uncertain terms. Well, obviously, I can't say on air what I said.
Of course,
but they were told to go. But the other thing is, this I'm going to say hatred of Harry and Meghan and parts of the British press is horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And they should have been taken to task over this a long time ago.
Well, I mean, the more we talk, the more 2 things become clear to me. The first is that this is not one of those subjects where I can, carry the torch of righteousness and illuminate dark corners of the country. I would struggle to muster a kind of resistance to the public opinion. The idea, as Alison pointed out from Belfast, that the below-the-line comments are now in the driving seat. It is difficult even for people like us who understand the gravity of the situation to convey to people who don't care why they should care. And part of the reason for that is... Part of the reason for that is that the people that you're seeking to appeal to are unreachable. And this, again, is the age of social media, the age of platforms, the age of negotiable truth, the age of alternative facts. And we go back to Lynn, who just hates Meghan Markle because she's been very, very carefully told to do so. I'll give you one example, because sometimes I forget that you're not as obsessed as I am with the way that the British media works. Thank you, Barry. So I'll give you what they wrote about Kate Middleton when she was photographed touching her bump while pregnant with her child, okay? And then after the break, I'll tell you what they wrote about Meghan Markle. And you, if you haven't heard this before, you will struggle to believe that this happened on the same website, in the same organ, both, one for the Daily Mail, one for the Mail on Sunday, right? So we'll start with Kate. Not long to go, pregnant Kate tenderly cradles her baby bump while wrapping up her royal duties ahead of maternity leave. And William confirms she's due any minute now. Find out in a moment what exactly the same outlet said about exactly the same behaviour while undertaken by a different wife of a different British prince.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:49 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. On the subject of what can happen when the media becomes part of the problem, maybe it always is or maybe it always has been, but when it actually abandons any pretense of truth. And I do see parallels between what has happened to Prince Harry over the years and what is happening in America now, creating an ecosystem in which the once unthinkable becomes the normal. So some crimes have been committed against someone incredibly prominent, and the ecosystem in which you'd expect those crimes to be properly investigated has been corrupted and turned into a place where you're pretty sure those crimes will not be investigated. In part, I would argue, but I couldn't close this argument down definitively, because the victims of the crime have been rendered so unpopular in the minds, if not of the public, then certainly of the mode of public opinion that is reflected by media coverage. And I found myself somewhat unexpectedly thinking of a police officer who came under attack on January the 6th in America, and who yesterday or this week has had the incredible experience of watching the people responsible for that violence walk free from jail. I want to play you a little bit of footage of him later as well, but I want you to understand why. It's what happens. 10:51 is the time. In fact, we may as well do it now. So Michael Fanone essentially had his life turned upside down on that day. He was there. He testified with his colleagues in front of the House Select Committee investigating the attack in 2021. He, on the day itself, he wasn't scheduled to go in on that day, but he self-deployed in response to radio calls for assistance. He was assaulted by rioters, dragged down the steps of the Capitol building, beaten with pipes, stunned with a taser, I think in the back of the head, someone tasered him. He was sprayed with chemical irritants, threatened with his own gun. He suffered burns, a heart attack, a concussion, a traumatic brain injury, and was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of the attack. He's still alive. Some of the police officers on duty that day subsequently took their own lives, we must conclude, as a consequence of the trauma that they endured. And yet Donald Trump has not only set them free, but also trivialized the offences for which they were originally jailed. I said to you yesterday, I don't know how we're going to do this. We're not in America, so it's not quite as urgent a question as it would be if we were. There'd be limits, possibly not with my employers, but I saw that a weather forecaster has been fired in America for describing on social media Elon Musk's Nazi salutes as Elon Musk's Nazi salutes. Someone has also sent me some footage of him doing the heart shape with his hands and then throwing his arms out. Which is what you do, of course, when you're giving your heart to people. You don't do what he did. But hey-ho, there's a photograph of Hillary Clinton waving at someone, and it's been cropped as a still, as proof that she does Nazi salutes as well. You can laugh at the stupidity of that kind of thing, but there are people who are lapping it up, people who are believing it. So here's a quick word from MSNBC in America on who the pardoned individuals. This is who Donald Trump is putting back on the streets of America. And I heard Michael Gove on with Nick this morning telling us that there's a lot of good stuff about Trump. And you have to keep pointing out that people like Michael Gove know better. He knows what he is green-lighting. He knows what he's ushering in. He's ushering in the release of people like this.
Let's talk about the individuals that were pardoned. Daniel Rodriguez, sentenced to more than 12 years in prison after he pled guilty and admitted to using a taser device, applying it to the base of my skull numerous times while I was being restrained in a crowd and assaulted. Albuquerque Cosper Head from Tennessee placed me in a headlock, pled guilty. This is the rioter that, if you watch my body-worn camera footage, yelled out, "I've got one," as he dragged me out into the crowd. Thomas Sibic, who, while I was restrained and being assaulted, ripped my badge and my radio from my police vest. Kyle Young, who, again, while I was being restrained and assaulted, tried to remove my firearm from its holster as he violently assaulted me. These individuals pled guilty. They admitted that they assaulted a uniformed law enforcement officer who was simply doing his job. And Donald Trump chose to pardon these violent criminals. They are all out on the street today. Because of Donald Trump's actions, my family is less safe.
And here he is speaking a little later in the same interview.
I fully expect to experience violence at the hands of some of these individuals, whether it's the ones that directly assaulted me or others who see me as a spokesperson for accountability for January 6th. I certainly feel as though I have a target on my back, and I have a target. There's a target on the back of my family members, and not just from these violent criminals, but from the government itself. From Donald Trump's government.
And the vexed question of how you deal with this level of lying and this level of misinformation. J.D. Vance, the Vice President, said on January the 12th of this year that people responsible for the violence during that riot should not be pardoned. The largest police union in the US, which endorsed Donald Trump during his campaign, has condemned the decision to pardon more than 1,500 people as sending a dangerous message. That qualifies as, well, when I voted for the Leopards Eating Faces party, I had no idea that the leopards were going to eat my face. But the vexed question of how you actually deal with it, Michael Fanone provides one answer to when he's presented with a character called Stuart Rhodes, one of the released prisoners and a leader of one of the most prominent organisations responsible for whipping up the violence on the day.
Any regrets?
No, I don't. Because we did the right thing. We were there to protect Trump supporters from Antifa. We were there to protect and secure 2 permitted events on Capitol grounds where members of Congress were going to speak. The guys that went inside, they're not committing the crimes. In fact, they help people. They help the police and help the people out.
He says he has no regrets. What do you say, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, this is what I would say to Stuart Rhodes. Go yourself.
Okay.
You're a liar.
And he is. But what do you do? You know, you have a debate, do you, on CNN with some people telling lies and other people saying, well, yes, well, you do a New York Times article about both sides. There is a liar. And there is someone telling the truth. Someone who got tasered in the back of the head, hearing that there was no violence. Anyway, on we go. I didn't even read out that Meghan Markle thing. So I told you what Kate Middleton got when she touched her baby bump. Pregnant Kate tenderly cradles her baby bump while wrapping up her royal duties ahead of maternity leave. And William confirms she's due any minute now. Less than a year later, her sister-in-law, pregnant. Why can't Meghan Markle keep her hands off her bump? Experts tackle the question that has got the nation talking. Is it pride, vanity, acting, or a new age bonding technique? That's just one example of the ecosystem in which Prince Harry is now hoping to see criminal acts, unlawful acts committed against him properly investigated. Malcolm's in Brighton. Malcolm, do you think it will be? Do you think it should be investigated further?
First of all, yes, I do think it should be investigated further. I think it's appalling. I'm mixed race myself, and I know when I'm 17, I know my late mother had a lot of problems. People saying if you got the right baby and everything else, there's no excuse for this behaviour. And I feel sorry for his wife, because at the end of the day, he married her because he loved her. He didn't worry about the colour. The colour shouldn't be into it. And I find it unacceptable, some of the press and videos and things like that on the internet really behave in this way towards a woman who married him because she loves him, you know? Does that make sense?
Of course it makes sense. I mean, it was the earliest analysis of why they hate him so much, or why they've gone after him so much. For me, it's now been overtaken by the sudden realisation that they wanted to create a world in which the prospect of them and their cronies being further investigated was about as low as they could possibly hope. And I think they've succeeded in that.
Well, I mean, the thing is, there's a law against this business. You know, we're not like Roots now and everything else. We're going back to like Roots and stuff. But the thing about it is, he went out with other people. They didn't work out, and he married her. And you know, at the end of the day, he's royalty. And I think if Princess Diana was alive, she'd be appalled by it.
She'd be proud of him yesterday. She'd obviously be.
Of course she would. Of course she would.
She was the canary down the coal mine, if you like, on this sort of invasion of privacy and this sort of awfulness. I'm going to do a quick thank you, Malcolm. Apologies to Andrea, who was waiting to talk. I'm going to do a quick Idiot's Corner for Janet, who's been in touch to say, I'd like to hear JOB's comments when Starmer released killers early from our jails. I'm happy to repeat them. He didn't release killers early from our jails. The overcrowding in prisons was a direct consequence of Conservative policies, so much so that Rishi Sunak was told it would have to happen before the general election, and it also happened under the Tories. All that happened under Labour was that they had to reduce even further the amount of time that had been served before people convicted of crimes and imprisoned could be released to make room for other people convicted of crimes who otherwise would not have been imprisoned. So the choice was to let convicted people go free. Oh, Janet.
James O'Brien on LBC.
You missed a trick there, James. You should have said, damn it, Janet. You're absolutely right. Nobody's perfect. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. And you know, I refer you to a piece Emily Maitlis wrote in yesterday's iNewspaper about these pardonings, because quite a few of you were unaware that J.D. Vance had absolutely stated on the 12th of January this year that there was no way that any of the violent offenders on the day of the January the 6th insurrection would be released. The largest police union, which endorsed Donald Trump, clearly felt it could never happen and is very unhappy that it did. An example I suggested of people who voted for the leopards eating face party being stunned to discover that the leopards are now eating their faces. The IACP and the FOP firmly believe, the statement said, that those convicted of such crimes should serve their full sentences. But Emily wrote an article about why Trump isn't actually pardoning them. He's essentially exonerating himself when he releases these people. Look at the language: insurrection. Remember what happened to Michael Fanone, tasered in the back of his head, heart attacks, post-traumatic stress disorder, police officers taking their own lives in the months after the events. Donald Trump's still lying about them and the cause of them simultaneously. One of those released prisoners still lying. So by pardoning them, he makes the lies true. Think about it. This is Orwell. This is why I feel a bit silly about quoting some of the Orwell stuff years ago when I feared it was on the horizon. And now we are smack in the middle of it. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. That there it is. He is exonerating violent criminals because the violent crime they committed was in his service. And here we are. It was Elliot Higgins, the founder of Bellingcat, who mentioned the brown shirts earlier this week. So what he has done is essentially ready a civilian militia. The next time he needs people to challenge reality, democracy, American values, call them what you will, the next time he needs people to help lies prevail over truth, he's now sent a message to anybody minded to do so that the laws will not apply to them, up to and including attacking police officers at the heart of US government. But don't worry, Michael Gove was chuckling away earlier today in this very studio about all the good stuff that Donald Trump represents and might do. So there's obviously nothing to fear from the creation of his own sort of de facto brown shirts. 6 minutes after 11 is the time. We turn our attention next to rather drier territory, but I think potentially important. Keir Starmer has promised to override the whims of NIMBYs by curbing legal challenges to big building projects. I like this story for two reasons. The first is that big building projects are absolutely crucial to economic growth, and economic growth is generally rightly regarded as both a good thing and rather necessary. The second reason I like it is it cuts across partisanship. It cuts across the idea that you know in advance what anybody is going to think about anything because of the way that they voted in 2016, or you know in advance how anybody is going to, what opinion anybody is going to have on any issue because of the way that they vote in general elections, or the way that they feel about Nigel Farage, or the way that they have voted in their entire lives, or what newspapers they... Well, you can predict their opinion according to what they think about immigration, what they think about Brexit, what they think about wokeness, albeit that none of the people who are furious about wokeness can ever tell you exactly what... You take my point. The stories that transcend that transcend both footballification and culture wars. I like that. And this is one of them, because I don't think your responses to stories like this will depend on your political history. When Keir Starmer cites a Green Party councillor who spent years trying to block vital safety upgrades to the A47 and shares the news that when the case reached the Supreme Court last year, it was dismissed for having, quote, no logical basis. The top judge even saying that it had, quotes, an air of complete reality. And he claims that he was able to waste years of the court's time and squander tens of millions of pounds of taxpayer money. Then most of us, regardless of our politics, and I think I would include supporters and members of the Green Party in this, when you see the phrases no logical basis and air of complete unreality, we would agree that should not have happened, that this character should not have been able to waste years of the court's time and squander tens of millions of pounds of taxpayer money. The Bat Tunnel fits perhaps into this category as well. The idea that the protection of some bats is so important that it can add... I've got the figure of £100 million. That can't be right. I should have Googled this before I started talking. In fact, would you mind if I do it now? Let me just double check what the cost... It might be in his article, actually, because I've heard him pick up on that a couple of times as well. So the Bat Tunnel, probably bring up a picture of Adam West. my memory, I've got to trust my memory more sometimes. That is the figure. £100 million for HS2 to protect bats. This was revealed by the chair of the HS2 rail line in a recent testimony to a select committee, I think. And look, I understand why bats are important. I understand why we shouldn't mess with the ecosystem. But £100 million? It's just one example of 8,276 consents required from public bodies in the course of building whatever remains of HS2. And it's hard to remember, isn't it? It's a good piece. On the BBC website, looking at the question of why does it cost £100 million for HS2 to protect bats? And obviously you don't want bats colliding with high-speed trains, so that will be part of the answer. But £100 million, who knows why? I've just submitted a quote on a bit of a wing and a prayer there, and couldn't quite believe it when it came back with a rubber stamp on it. I thought, crikey, trebles all round. But it's a world which is hard to get excited about. We've succeeded in the past in getting a modicum of excitement. It's a pendulum issue, this, it seems to me. You should not be able or allowed to build anything you want wherever you want. About this we can agree, can't we? Obviously, simply by dint of owning land, you should not be able to throw up whatever you want on it, or dig your own coal mine, or build a skyscraper. The furthest extremes are fairly easy to map. We need these sort of protections in order to ensure that stupid stuff doesn't happen. And there are plenty of people who would be happy to do the stupid stuff if there was a few quid in it. So we need planning regulations. That is obvious. But it doesn't mean that the pendulum has stayed in a sensible place. It doesn't mean that the protection of the environment has not gone too far. And I'm not saying this as some sort of fossil fuel fetishist or Donald Trump fan. I'm just saying that there are examples of things getting silly. The Bat Tunnel is one example, and this councillor cited by Keir Starmer, and as if to prove my point about topics that cut across partisanship, he's writing this article in the Daily Mail today. Citing the example of a case that had no logical basis, according to the judge that actually heard it. Now, Starmer claims that there are countless more examples of NIMBYs and zealots gumming up the legal system, often for their own ideological blind spots, to stop the government building the infrastructure the country needs. Crucially, they know they have no chance of winning. They just want to drag it out in the hopes that the government or industry gives up. They want to win for themselves, not for the country. He talks about, and this is where you can get involved, he talks about Extinction Rebellion activists who block the motorway at rush hour without a care for the hardworking people going about their lives. He talks about a group in East Anglia who prevented the development of a wind farm for 2 years, robbing people of lower bills and good jobs. He talks about another group that delayed the Sizewell C nuclear plant with similarly unsuccessful claims. And because of a fear of challenge, he says, you get the £100 million Bat Tunnel, or the proposal to install an acoustic fish deterrent, which would involve 288 underwater speakers designed to scare fish away from Hinkley Point C nuclear power station. And Keir Starmer writes, I wish I was joking. 288 underwater speakers. I know how much that would cost. More than half of all decisions on major infrastructure in this country were taken to court, holding us back and stifling growth. Now, how do we achieve two things this morning? How do we, A, get excited about this? I mean, he's done a pretty good job, actually, by picking tabloid-flavoured examples, bat tunnels and fish speakers. Sounds a bit indecent, doesn't it? But how do we get excited about this? I don't know. And then the second question is, will this help? So I often mention to you that when I go home and I go back to my old house, not the house that Mum lives in now, but the house that I did most of my alleged growing up in, I note a rather large extension of a big estate that was just down the road from where we lived. And it's big. It will need a lot of infrastructure, and it is being built on what was previously farmland. And when we lived on farmland, I remember regularly the neighbours and my parents sharing concerns about plans or applications to build houses on the fields where we lived, on the fields that you could see from our windows, the fields that stretch down, if you're familiar with that part of Kidderminster, from Haberley Golf Club, as it was, down to Kidderminster proper, down to the town proper. And you can simultaneously, and this is why the word NIMBY is not mega helpful, but also the only word we can use. You can simultaneously think, gosh, we need more housing for a whole heap of reasons, but I don't want it there. I don't want to be able to see it from my bedroom window. The same is probably true of wind farms, isn't it? You sort of I wouldn't mind a turbine. I don't think they're going to throw any big ones up in Brentford anytime soon, but I think there's something quite majestic, especially the offshore ones. They're up there with me, with my bridge fetish. That fascination I've got with it, feats of human engineering that describe almost a kind of taming of nature, like massive bridges or cranes or wind farms, either on or offshore, but the offshore ones have that slightly future. Sorry, I've gone all Anunnaki. I do apologise. So, what is the reality of this world? 0345 6060 973. I am conscious of environmental matters. I'm conscious of the emergency. Of the many things that terrify me about Donald Trump, the idea that they're going to make things worse, not even just continue on the unsatisfactory path that we're already on. But I also don't see how this country washes its face economically without, for example, having a third runway at Heathrow. But what I would like to know is what's happened in your life. What happens when the people Keir Starmer is talking about try to stop a project from going ahead? I'm hoping there are enough people listening to this programme qualified to comment on this. I have to warn you that the sentencing of the Southport killer is due to start in the next hour or so. It will be very, very long. When there is something to bring you, I will bring it to you, up to and including interrupting and or abandoning Mystery Hour. So let me give you a quick heads up on that. This is absolutely and categorically one of those moments where even Mystery Hour must bow to the breaking news. But before all of that, I just don't know what actually happens. I mean, he's come up with funny examples. I would like quite dull examples. I know that sounds odd, but it's easy to get people excited about bat tunnels and underwater fish speakers. I want the examples that are not going to make the news, but which are incredibly frustrating or not. My phone lines are open for you to tell me why this is also wrong, why you need to have the freedom to object to these, even if it opens the door for some frivolous and silly objections. You can't keep the situation safe for the important objections without admitting the silly ones. I think that's true in lots of areas of life. Is it the price you pay for something valuable is something annoying or something silly? It could fit into that category, 0345 6060 973. So that's what I want to know. I want to know what it's like, A, when you want to build something, ideally quite big. I'm sure that the tale of your extension is fascinating, but I don't know how big a contribution it would make to nationwide economic growth. So what is it like when you want to build something? How hard is it to get a nice, decent-sized project off the ground? 0345 6060 973. And the second question is, what happens when people try to stop it? How right is Keir Starmer to talk about NIMBYs and zealots holding the country to ransom? Because all we ever hear about are the slightly ridiculous tabloid examples. If the bat tunnel had never happened and if the fish speakers are never installed, it's not going to make a measurable difference to the UK economy. It's just going to deny a few journalists and radio presenters of interesting phone-in topics. So what's the reality of A, trying to get things built? And you will know more about this than me, 0345 6060 973, and B, trying to stop things getting built. I want the reality of both of those phenomena. The reality of trying to get stuff built, the reality of people, possibly you, trying to stop stuff from being built, and the plausibility of Keir Starmer's claim, and this will be a little bit harder to pin down, that they can A, turn things upside down for the better, and B, make a measurable and considerable impact on major infrastructure projects. They're fast-tracking 150, he writes this morning, almost 3 times as many as the Tories managed in 14 years. GP surgeries, roads, railways, reservoirs, grids to support new homes, towns and villages we're going to build. All sounds fantastic. I hope that it's true. I want you to tell me whether you think it is. It's 20 minutes after 11.
James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 11 is the time. What's quite funny, I don't know if you're interested in this or not, but it makes me laugh, is I got quite, as you know, I have high hopes. High hopes. So I start a conversation like this with one eye on the switchboard, because it's not easy to get people, not easy to get interesting calls on subjects of planning. So it's never that hard to get calls. But one of the great myths of radio phone-in is that the challenge is to make the phones ring. It's easy to make the phones ring. It's talk about immigration all the time, or ask if anyone's got a parking ticket that was really unfair, or Clive Bull's favourite, is there anybody old out there feeling poorly? And boom, switchboard lights up like a Christmas tree. So I talk to you about planning with one eye on the switchboard, and I find myself saying things like, I'm not that interested in your extension. I want to hear about biggish developments. And then, of course, if the phones don't ring, I'm going to have to dial down my expectations. So the producer and I just had a chat in the break, and she said, building houses is okay, isn't it? Building houses fits. And I said, how many? And she said, about a dozen. I said, yeah, that's fine. But of course, if the phones don't ring, we'll have a conversation at past, and I'll say, all right, maybe just a garage. Maybe someone's just trying to do their side return. And that's got no relevance whatsoever, really, to the bigger question. But we can work only with what we have in front of us. 23 minutes after 11 is the time. Half a dozen houses is fine. I'm more than fine. It's a development that will create jobs and oil the wheels of the economy. So we'll start with Chloe, who's in Barnstaple. Chloe, tell me your story.
Hello there, James.
Hello.
Basically, many years ago, my father purchased a piece of land with greenhouses on, and he wanted to build a bungalow, mum and dad retire, have this lovely little small holding, everything great.
Sounds nice.
Yeah, it was a wonderful idea, and he put in his planning permission, etc., and it was turned down. And for several years, he tried to get planning permission, and it was, no, definitely not. The only thing you will be allowed to build on the land is affordable houses.
Okay.
So he said, well, at the time, that meant that you were just giving the land. You didn't make any money out of affordable houses at all. So then years went by, and father passed away, and mum passed away, and the family were left the field, as it were. So together we said, okay, let's look at this affordable housing. So we looked into it, and obviously we couldn't afford to just build houses and give them away. It's just not realistic.
No.
But we worked with the council.
Just for people confused, when you say give them away, what you mean is that you wouldn't make a profit on building them and selling them if they were, quotes, affordable, end quotes. So the person moving into them wouldn't have been given them. But
you're quite right.
Just doing the subject, because, not everyone's as clever as you and me, Chloe.
Lovely. So, yes, you're quite right. So it's down to the builder to build the properties, and there's very little, if any, profit in it. So we worked with the council, and the council were fantastic and said, we want the affordable houses. So we worked it out with the housing consultants as well, and we sat for hours putting all this together. And it's a lovely little development, half a dozen houses. 50% of them are affordable, and 50% of them are not.
Perfect.
Yeah. And we're very pleased with the plans that we've put together. They are beautiful homes that people can enjoy. It's not sort of cheap and nasty, it's proper nice little homes with gardens in country. Wonderful. So council are delighted. We've put in our application, and it was turned down. And basically it's turned down on the basis that they didn't feel that it warranted having half a dozen houses
How
there.
can it be turned down if the council is supporting your application?
Well, this is where it gets very fussy and very difficult, because the council, as in the planning department, they need affordable houses, and they are trying to get people to build affordable houses.
Which you're doing.
But Yes, but then it goes to the local parish council, and the local parish council then say, we don't want it, it doesn't fit our criteria.
So this is the sort of thing that he's probably talking about. This gets filed under NIMBYs.
Yep, but I'm afraid so.
And what criteria did they offer, Chloe? If I can, what were their reasons for objecting? I think I can guess, but I want to hear it from you.
It was just really that it would affect the countryside, that it would ruin the beauty of the countryside.
We don't want more. We don't. Not in our backyard.
Exactly, and it's been very frustrating that we've tried to be amenable. This has gone on for several years. That we've been toing and froing, and we've gone to appeal. And at the appeal, you couldn't have had a nicer refusal of the appeal.
Sure.
They basically said that we had failed it on one aspect, where now, because the laws are all changing all of the time, there's an environmental cost that has to be paid. And they said, you're going to need to pay that environmental cost. So we put the plans in again, and it was turned down on the basis that we don't want affordable houses in the village.
Because of the kind of people that would come in?
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
No, I thought it must be that. Okay.
Yeah, but they said if you're going to have affordable, then the only size affordables you can have are one bedroom, which of course that doesn't fit with the whole.
I don't know what a one bedroom house would look like.
Yeah, aesthetically it wouldn't work.
It'd look like a garage with a gabled roof, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
Sleep upstairs and have a sitting room downstairs. I mean, listen, you are describing a saga, so understandably it can turn into a bit of a saga, even in the relaying of it. Just briefly, where are you now? Are you still in stalemate now?
We definitely are. We're in the position.
How many years? How many years since this started? Not since your dad bought it, but since this project started.
We're going into our fourth year. But where we are at the moment, because the appeal is still ongoing, but my biggest frustration at the moment is with the appeal. That's been outstanding for over a year now.
And that is what, I mean, I don't know the specifics of what Keir Starmer is describing, but when he talks about removing tools used by time-wasting NIMBYs and ungumming the system to deliver our plan for change and boost living standards across the country, you can't help thinking that this is the kind of project that he has in mind. Chloe, thank you. You've taken me right up to the 5:30 news. Just time to squeeze in a message from James, who's in Cardiff. Speaks for many people. He says, I'm really torn. My heart is completely torn on this matter. I appreciate that we really need to build to benefit society and economic growth. However, I'm also very mindful of how fragile our wildlife ecosystems are and how much they have been decimated by over time. You introduced me to the wonderful book Wild City by Florence Wilkinson, who highlighted the incredible wildlife throughout the UK, particularly close to urban areas, and the amazing people that work tirelessly to protect it and the plants under threat. I think there needs to be balance, but I appreciate you cannot satisfy both sides all of the time. What a lovely measured message, James. It'll never catch on, but I think it sits nicely opposite Chloe's story, doesn't it? Because there's no element in the attempts to stymie Chloe's family's project that would be considered environmental. You've got a little bit of snobbery and a little bit of NIMBYism. And if you accept the need for housing, the need for growth, the need for more, changing demographics demand it, not least the ageing population, staying in homes that could house many, many more people, but no one wants to start compelling people to move out of their homes, then you're going to need to build more. And I like the way those two sit together, because that seems to be the middle ground. Some objections will still be valid, some objections will still work, but some won't. So what are the objections that shouldn't work, in your view? 0345 6060 973. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:33, and as things stand, it looks like Mystery Hour will be okay. No hesitation whatsoever in crossing immediately to the sentencing of the Southport killer, which is due to begin in the next hour or so. But our advice at the moment is that it's unlikely to be concluded before, or it's unlikely to begin until after lunch. There'll be all sorts of business that is being seen to by the court, and therefore it will be on Vanessa's watch, I think, that becomes live. So for the moment, if you are concerned about such things, Mystery Hour appears to be safe. Russell's been in touch. It's a great point, James, about people living longer and staying in their homes. Of course, this affects supply. No one ever seems to talk about it. especially all those trying to blame our ills on immigration. Building more homes is the only answer. A couple of you cross with me for saying that I don't know what a one-bedroom house looks like. Well, not cross, actually, Dean, there it is. Just educate him. And, you're absolutely right, of course. There's some near me. They'll be part of a bigger building. It's just like on the end you'll have a one-bedroom house. I turn your attention this hour to the planning question because it is, as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of freed from obvious partisanship. And that's why I like it. But what I don't know is how much wiggle room there is for Keir Starmer and how much, if you like, he's applying a laxative to a constipated system. That's not a great analogy because the next thing I say is, and I want to know what happens next. 11:35 is the time. And I've got quite a good misinformation for you, I think, which ties into Russell's point about immigration getting the blame for everything in this country. Matt's in Cardiff. Matt, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First-time caller, so please do be gentle.
Yeah, well, I can't imagine circumstances in which this subject would kick off, but no, you never know, do you, Matt? You never know.
You never know. Let's see where we go. Look, it's funny that this one's come up right now. It sort of pricked my ears up straight away. I'm in the process of buying a property in East Cambridge. Since going through the process, obviously it's a long, arduous process of buying something in this country.
Yes.
We've since sort of discovered there is the largest solar farm in Europe, which is being built, a stone's throw away.
Could you see it from your window, do you think?
Not from the window,
okay.
But it's a couple of fields behind, and it's one which has potential to keep growing and growing and growing because obviously there's a lot of fields, a lot of farms in the area. And they've obviously got quite ambitious and fairly aggressive plans to sort of keep moving.
Yes.
My concern is, and it's kind of, I don't know where the angle of Keir Starmer's speech is necessarily coming from, if it's a case of looking at roads and infrastructure from that perspective. But when you're talking about things like solar farms, wind farms, you shift it from being almost like a complete government project to a government incentivized project.
What do you mean? Because it's going to be difficult to separate you're concerned about the value of your new home, I think, are you? Probably? And the aesthetics of it. And the aesthetics of it. It's difficult to separate them from the politics. Because is it the Sunnica one on the Cambridge-Suffolk border?
It is the Kingsway solar farm. It is. So it's a mix of both solar panels and sort of hydro and all of that, a combination of different things.
And is it on the border between Cambridgeshire and Suffolk? Is it that one?
It is.
Yeah. Okay. So
it's going south. It's going between sort of East Cambridge.
I think this is the one. I think this is the one. This is a really good example of what's going to happen because I think that Ed Miliband has overruled some local objections on this, hasn't he? Including the head of the local council. So Matt Hancock's called it too big, and that's what you're worried about.
It is, and look, I'm moving to a conservation area as well. This is a sort of side step, but moving into a conservation area where it's going to take 3 to 6 months to change windows.
You can't have that. You can't have that. You can't. That's to protect. I've lived in a conversation. I had to take a bathroom out with which I'd put in with my level of genius without knowing that I wasn't allowed to, because I lived in a conversation area. I work in a conversation area, Matt. That's all gone a bit partridge. Welcome to the conversation area. So they do that for a reason. I had to move a satellite dish on my roof because it's a conservation area.
Which look, I do understand, but the serious side to it is it does take an incredible long time. They're trying to push up our ESPs and all of our energy things, and it's taken an incredible long time, and it's expensive cost to go through. But
it's got to go somewhere. It's only so many places you can put a 2,500 acre solar farm, aren't there?
Look, and absolutely. So my argument to that is that's gone on a CB postcode.
Yeah,
that is an expensive plot of land, and this is going out, and it's being. It's a contract which has been given out to a private company to basically manage that. After a certain period of time, that's an agricultural use land. After a certain period of time, my thought would be that that's going to change. And
there's a lot of dual purpose. I don't know if you heard, I had a phone call from an incredibly angry farmer late last year, and I mean like nuclear. There's no clean energy there. That was absolutely. Well, I suppose nuclear is clean energy. And as a consequence of his fulminating, I got sent loads and loads of information, more than anyone could ever need, about how solar farms can actually also, shelter livestock, and they can be dual use as well. But your points are all valid, but they're never going to be valid enough to overcome the necessity of economic growth, are they? As soon as you accept that wherever it happens, there will always be a Matthew.
That's absolutely correct, and I'm always the first to say we need to build more things. Yeah. And ironically enough, I made my money in construction. but at the same time, my concern is that projects like this can be pushed through using the NSIP, isn't it? Pushed through using the NSIP, National Significantly Infrastructure Project. To get these things pushed through, and then you're in the hands of a private business. And then, ironically enough, in 2 years' time, the James O'Brien phone-in show becomes about how a lot of these companies have either screwed over the locals or they've bought the land, given it 5 years, and then they've turned that land into housing, and then the infrastructure for roads and that sort of stuff just simply isn't there. And then we've got a case which has been overdeveloped. These companies have used the CB postcode to divvy up the land, maintain the freehold, and then put things out on leasehold, and then we become in a completely different situation.
And so therefore, oddly, as this is in its current form a story about reducing regulation, you actually remind us that you will need perhaps some new kinds of regulation to guard against the things that you describe. But I salute your honesty, and for the record, I think I'd be exactly the same. I can argue intellectually, even slightly emotionally, because energy is part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, isn't it? So you can argue for the necessity of something like this, but as you say, if it was a stone's throw from my own back door, I would almost certainly feel differently about it. So, and that's what they're dealing with.
I'm just looking for my own self-actualization, James.
There we go. That's the spirit. But that's the point that Starmer's addressing. The language is not helpful necessarily, because calling you a NIMBY, or I don't think he'd call you a zealot, but he'd definitely call you a NIMBY. You'd call yourself a NIMBY. NIMBYism is logical, emotionally and intellectually logical, but it is the thing he's got in his sights for reasons that we've articulated and that I know you understand. You're still going ahead, are you? It's not enough to put you off the move.
No, absolutely still going ahead, and hopefully in 6 months' time we'll get the new windows in.
Yes, exactly. And it does matter. I mean, it is annoying when you find yourself in those sort of situations, but generally I think that the regulations governing conservation areas and listed buildings are, I think, I could be wrong, I hope I'm not going to accidentally open a whole new Pandora's box, are widely regarded to be fit for purpose, whereas some of this stuff clearly isn't. And I thought that Chloe in Barnstaple made valid points about some of the objections being really unfair, even unkind, but treated, of course, with the same weight and the same heft as if they were really valid and really fair. That's where I worry. Not so much in Matt's case, because I think, as we've both kind of agreed, it is very, very much going to depend on how close to your back door the new development is. That's why the word NIMBY got invented. But the bit that worries me is that when you change the system in order to shut down what you might call the frivolous or the illogical or the pointless objections that gum up the system, do you also compromise the system for the valid objections, for the very real complaints that should delay and possibly deny permissions? I don't know. I don't know who would be able to answer that, but I know that Christabel is in Ramsgate. Christabel, what would you like to say?
Well, I think just picking up on what you're just saying, James, that the reason I rang in was because I wanted just to say that when you have a judicial review, it isn't, in my experience, it's not NIMBYism. It's a sort of way of feeling that you've got your only avenue left to some sort of justice.
Yes.
So, and then it goes into the court and the High Court, and in our case, the Court of Appeal, that we at last felt that we were being heard against all the odds. So it was kind of a little, sort of bit of an rather boring Erin Brockovich
yes,
sequel.
that's not boring at all.
No, not at all. But it felt like it was the little people against the big guns, and that it was our self-funded access to justice. So,
but you've highlighted the point I was just making perfectly. If you're in Ramsgate, so this would be Manston, was it, that you were?
Correct.
Yeah. So the cargo airport, trying to build a massive cargo airport on your doorstep.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the point I was just making. In that, so if I take you, Chloe, and Christabel, which sounds like a Jane Austen novel, doesn't it? So Chloe,
or a band,
or a band, yeah, Chloe and the Christabels. Her case is the kind of thing that needs to be expedited. There's a word I don't often get to use, and that's what they're aiming at. Our worry is that it would make your cause harder to pursue as well, because you won.
Exactly.
I think overall.
Well, no, it was. I mean, it's actually over now because it went, and it was a long and tedious legal process. But in the end, the Court of Appeal overruled us.
And they built the airport. Of course, they did. Yes.
No, of course they haven't, because I suspect that the funding might not be there, but it's not for me to say. But no, the skies are silent. But the civil service came in, the planning inspectorate came in to assess it, and concluded, having spoken to all interested parties over an extensive 6 months, that the airport wasn't a goer. It would cause economic damage to Ramsgate and environmental. Was going against that. Blah blah blah.
How do we know?
It's backed by MPs. It's backed by the Secretary of State at the time, who was Grant Shapps, which is when we launched the judicial review, just with people, people in the community who didn't want cargo planes going overhead every 12 minutes.
Well, you wouldn't, would you?
No, you wouldn't.
And this is what we don't know. I mean, you need Keir Starmer to explain what happens to valid how do you speed up the system by sort of pruning the silly complaints without also compromising the likelihood of success for the very, very serious and valid complaints?
Exactly. And I think in the coverage of it since the news came out, the focus has been on bats. Well, not that that's not serious, but, on the more trivial and the things that people will pick up in the press, and not with the counter argument that, of course, there will be.
But the planes are going to have to. This is where, and I know that there is a very compelling argument against the inevitability of increasing growth, and it's best expressed as the impossibility of having infinite growth on a planet with finite resources. But I don't think the world's ready for that argument yet. So we accept on a national level that we need economic growth. Therefore, we need new airports and we need new runways. They're going to have to fly over someone's house, aren't they? So I could put you in Matt's box, where it's all very unfortunate, and I feel very sorry for you, but they're going to have to go somewhere.
What, for a private company to gain profit with offshore investors?
That's not the point.
In an airport that had gone bankrupt 3 times before and is in geographically completely the wrong place. But I mean, that's our local argument.
Yes.
But,
I mean, it doesn't change the fact that if we accept the need for increased trade, then we will need more airports.
Yes, but
or more flights at least.
When you really look into the number crunching of a need for cargo, particularly as Brexit happens in the middle, in this case.
Well, that might be a Brexit benefit. That might be why it never. Sorry, I'm interrupting you while you're interrupting me.
After you.
No, after you.
Well, so when you're told that there's more than enough capacity for cargo at the other airports that are existing with very good infrastructure in this country alone, therefore it's not needed and not wanted. Well, not needed was the conclusion of the civil service. Not wanted was the conclusion of the people fighting it, like me.
Yeah.
And the many, many, many others in the community. Then you're thinking, so why? So why? This isn't, if it would have been a wind farm, it would be, do you see what I mean?
Yeah,
wind farm expansion, you'd suck it up. There's a huge one anywhere and like it. But, this is what I mean. It's
so
not
the suspicion or the fear that someone's going to make a ton of money out of building it, and it may not actually be profitable or necessary or needed afterwards. It's like the out-of-town shopping centre syndrome, isn't it?
Yeah.
In my view, when they build these out-of-town shopping centres and then 10 years later they build another one and the last one empties. Christabel, I tell you what, you sound, and I mean this very authentically, you sound like quite a formidable foe I can see why you were so initially successful. I wonder whether you've also unearthed a Brexit benefit. If Brexit had gone ahead, I beg your pardon, if Brexit hadn't gone ahead, then there may well have been a more urgent need for the kind of capacity that airport was mooted to provide. But of course, with trade, particularly in goods, with our nearest neighbours going off a metaphorical cliff, the case for needing more cargo flights possibly disappeared over the horizon as well. It's 11:49.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:52. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Okay, marks out of 10. Have we managed to make a conversation about planning interesting? I don't know. Actually, maybe don't answer that. Important news for you. One of the reasons, probably the main reason why the sentencing of the Southport killer, Axel Ruda-Cabana, has been delayed and is yet to commence is that he was taken to hospital in the early hours of today for medical attention, but is now due to attend court to be sentenced. So it almost certainly won't happen on my watch, and almost certainly will happen and conclude crucially, because it will be quite a long and complicated statement from the judge in this case, the conclusions of which will be brought to you, I imagine, by Vanessa Phelps, possibly even by Tom Swarbrick, depending upon the passage of time. By popular demand, another example of horrible headlines, just talking in the first hour, if you weren't with us, about the context in which the people responsible for breaking the law to invade Prince Harry's privacy will be fairly confident that they're not going to get their collars felt or at least investigated. The context in which that can happen, the ecosystem in which that can happen, is an ecosystem in which Prince Harry and his wife have been routinely and violently maligned for years. And sometimes a juxtaposition of headlines from the same organ can prove it in a way that, a 1,000-word academic treatise on bias simply couldn't. I've done this a few times. It never ceases to shock me, so goodness knows how it reaches your ears if you're hearing it for the first time. So, avocados. How could an avocado possibly play a part in portraying the vicious bias of UK newspapers when it comes to Meghan Markle? I'll tell you. Both of these stories are from the same newspaper. I say newspaper. They're from the same place, a place called The Express. Kate's morning sickness cure. Prince William gifted with an avocado for pregnant Duchess. Oh, isn't that nice? So a member of the public gave Prince William an avocado because wrapped up in a bow by a little boy whose mother is suffering during her pregnancy too. Because it is believed to be a nice little cure for morning sickness. So that's the headline on this story. Kate's morning sickness cure. Prince William gifted with an avocado for pregnant Duchess. Now, Meghan Markle is known to like avocados. Like everyone, really. Don't at me to tell me that you don't like avocados, all right? Life's too short. And this is how it got reported in the same newspaper shortly afterwards. Meghan Markle's beloved avocado linked to human rights abuse and drought. Millennial shame. I mean, even if you thought I was mad, yeah? Even if you thought I was wearing a tinfoil hat when I tried to describe to you how insane the coverage of this couple has been, you're going to hear that, possibly even more than the baby bump story or the honeymoon posy story. Kate's morning sickness cure. Prince William gifted with an avocado for pregnant Duchess. Meghan Markle's beloved avocado linked to human rights abuse and drought. She's getting the blame. Well, anyway. So that is the world in which people are absolutely adamant they know that Meghan Markle is a greedy psychopath. And I could go on. It wasn't me that put all this together, actually. It was a journalist for the much missed BuzzFeed News called Ellie Hall, and she did a bang-up job on it. And I don't even know that that's the best one. I think the best one is probably the honeymoon posy. I wonder if I'll be able to find that for you in time. 11:56, back to planning. Max is in Solihull. Max, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Max.
We have spoken previously.
About this?
I'm full disclosure, I'm a Green Party councillor.
Full disclosure, I'm recording one with Alistair McGowan later today, actually. So you've just reminded me. Carry on.
And also, I'm going to quote you again. Anecdote is not the plural. Data is not anecdote is not the plural of data.
Correct.
So yeah, and so actually, I against my will, have had to become a bit of not an expert, but a more educated layperson on this in my time. And obviously there's been lots of signals for changes in planning legislation.
Yes.
I've had to go through the data historically, and you can go on the government's website. There's not really been any significant change in the number of planning applications refused in the last 10 years. What has happened is the number of applications has reduced, and there's two things for that. Land prices. So obviously we've seen what's happened with people investing in land, with hedge funds and others, as we noticed with the protest over inheritance tax, and also interest rates, so the financing of development. So I think that there is a bit of a push from developers to try and relax planning legislation, and it's already heavily tilted in favour of developers. So we are already very, very centralised in the UK compared to European counterparts in terms of decisions that are taken.
What about on infrastructure as opposed to on housing?
So in relation to infrastructure, there's another issue. So going back to the initial thing that was in the article there, the question around that was whether the government had applied their own calculations to the carbon calculation on it. So I'm not an expert on that specific one, but I do know, because obviously there's an airport in our local authority, there is a very significant issue when you do not calculate the environmental impact of certain projects, because then you may not be considering alternatives appropriately.
So do you recognise what Keir Starmer is describing, Max?
I mean, so this is
the gumming up of the system, because it sounds as if you're essentially challenging his fundamental thesis here.
I am.
Oh, I thought so.
So I think there is an issue in that, saying that, you know, the whole process is very gummed up. At the moment, it is very much in favour of developers, and I appreciate there's a difference between infrastructure and sort of, you know, major planning applications for housing. I can understand that, and obviously I lived in China previously. I could see how they managed to push major infrastructure projects through.
Well, I don't imagine. I don't imagine you've got much right to object, have you, in China?
You don't. No. You don't. But at the same time, here, I think that we do have this narrative, and it does. One thing I'll say, and I'm not pointing fingers too hard at anyone here, but there is publicly available data in terms of who makes donations to political parties, and you can see the donations from major developers to political parties. So I do think there are some vested interests there, and I can bore you to death on the NPPF, which is the National Planning Policy Framework, and the changes that have been going.
Well, I don't know that you would bore me to death, actually, because I think once you acknowledge the importance of something, then it's on you to recognise that makes it, by definition, interesting. But, I mean, Starmer's set it out, 150 major infrastructure projects, and there's a middle ground between the two positions you describe, and that middle ground would be, whatever the reasons behind it happening, if the developers and Keir Starmer get their own way, there will be a lot more building.
Yeah, so this is the thing. So
quickly, because you're going to make us late for Mystery Hour, and that kind of stuff can get a man into serious trouble, Max.
Yeah, we need to separate two things out here: infrastructure and housing. And I think the majority of the conversation has been around housing. The argument that we're going to make housing more affordable. You don't make housing more affordable unless government invests into that building.
We haven't.
The land prices.
Yeah,
but the government aren't doing that. So I do think there's a little misdirect.
Okay, and the key word being affordable, which, Chloe in Barnstable and her tale of her family's plot notwithstanding, it hasn't been a central thrust of this conversation, and I don't think it's a central thrust of Keir Starmer's position either. I think it more without determining whether it would be quotes affordable or not. But yeah, I mean, goodness, that's why I love my job these days, even more than ever, because you've got people like Max on the end of a phone line, and he has done the reading, as we used to say at college. 12:01 is the time. Mystery Hour after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 12 is the time, and Mystery Hour is upon us, your weekly opportunity to achieve the sort of satisfaction not ordinarily available anywhere else on your radio dial. The way it works, in case you don't know, is this. Someone rings in with a question, somebody else rings in with an answer. Somewhere between those two positions, the magic lies. And if it's particularly magical, your contribution, if you choose to join in, then you could win a Mystery Hour ball game. I've got news coming as well of the the update or the sequel to the Mystery Hour board game, which will be with you sooner rather than later. But if you want to find out the full terms and conditions for that competition, you can go to lbc.co.uk. And if you want to find out more about the board game itself and possibly get your grubby little hands on one all of your own, then you can go to mysteryhour.co.uk. I think that covers it. The number remains the same. If you've got a question you want to get on the board, then you know what to do, don't you? I think, should we just kick off straight away? Emma is in Ashfield. Emma, question or answer?
It's a question, James.
Carry on.
You ignited something in me.
Pardon?
About an hour ago.
Emma?
Yes.
Please.
When you said that you love a bridge.
Yes,
I
and a
love
crane.
a bridge. I love a bridge, a crane. I love big art installations. I love big engineering.
Yes. Viaducts?
Everything.
I bet you're a sucker for a viaduct, aren't you?
I love a viaduct.
I love a viaduct too. And an aqueduct. You don't see as many of them. Go on.
So I wondered if there's a name for us.
Oh.
Obviously, I think we're files of something.
Apart from super cool dudes, you mean?
Awesome. Awesomeness.
Apart from awesome. So acts of epic engineering.
Yes, just feats of man-made items.
I like that a lot.
It is engineering, but also, let me recommend a great day out to you in Scotland.
Go on.
You go to the Kelpies. You see the huge art installation. You go to the Falkirk Wheel, and you've got that big feat of engineering, and then drive over the Queen's Ferry Bridge alongside the Forth Bridge.
Amazing.
And you're just seeing everything, and it's incredible. And I've been giggling at how nerdy I am, and I didn't realise how nerdy I was.
I don't think it's nerdy. I think we're describing majesty. I don't know if we can include the art.
No?
Well, because for me it's about man's dominion over nature. I think it is when I've thought about it. It's like evidence of how brilliant brains and hard work can tame nature.
There is that, and you see that when you go to the Clifton Suspense Bridge. And
yes.
And it's magic. But also, if you're stood at the bottom of the Kelpies and you're seeing somebody thought this out to make this to this huge scale.
It's a different sort of magic, though. I don't know. It doesn't change your question. I mean,
no.
Whatever the definition of the extraordinary feats of engineering or artistry may be, and the Falkirk Wheel could almost be an art installation, couldn't it?
Oh,
really?
It really is.
I've never seen it in real life, but it's an absolutely extraordinary.
Go see it.
I will.
Go to the
promise.
Kelpies.
I think I might.
I'm in
that neck of the woods later this year with a bit of luck.
And there's a place in Falkirk that does Scottish tapas. You can have the best day.
This is incredible. Are you on commission?
No.
You're being seconded by the Scottish Tourist Board? Scottish
really
tapas. What? I can tell. Okay, so it's a name for the people that love it. People like us. What are we called? Something Files. Something Files. I like it.
Aren't we?
We certainly are. Emma, lovely question. Perfect question. And a reason for everyone to Google the Falkirk Wheel as well, which is an absolutely extraordinary feat of, I'm going to coin the phrase canal-based engineering, but you need to see it to believe it. 12:08 is the time. Judith is in Claygate. Judith, question or answer?
It's a question, James.
Carry on, Judith.
Nice to talk to you.
Likewise.
It's the RSPB Great Birdwatch weekend this weekend.
Yes.
And you have to watch and record the number of birds in your garden. And we've been doing it for a number of years. And what I'd like to know is, are the birds that we see at the moment related to the ones that we saw a few years ago? So we see robins and blue tits and coal tits and blackbirds and so on.
What's your favourite?
Birds have nested. What's my favourite? Long-tailed tits.
Okay. You see, once you get into the habit of looking for stuff, you see quite a nice variety, don't you, in England?
You do. I mean, we've got an amazing collection of birds in our garden. We get woodpeckers.
What sort of woodpeckers do you get? Lesser spotted?
Green ones.
The green ones are amazing. The green ones are so exotic, aren't they? They're so unexpectedly exotic.
Yeah.
I was walking through Boston Manor Park the other day with one of my daughters, and we stopped to read the sign about what wildlife is present. And I said to her, "God, you never see a lesser spotted woodpecker." And I kid you not, Judith, we heard the sort of And she said, I think that's and I thought she was yanking my chain. And we paused and we actually found it. We followed the noise and looked up at the top of a tree, and there it was. There was a lesser spotted woodpecker doing its thing. It was the first time I'd done it in that spot. I've seen them elsewhere. I saw a green one at Kew Gardens, would you believe? Just came around the corner and there it was. And once, I don't know what it would have been. I was just walking through the woodland near the Severn Valley Railway in Bewdley, and I came down a little hill, round a corner on a path, and there was a bird of prey on a fence post. I could go on forever about it. You've picked, this is all my favourite subjects today: bridges, cranes, and birds. It's all there. So the question is, when we start our survey this weekend, will they be the great-grandchildren of the birds that we counted a few years ago?
Exactly. Or do birds have a nest? Because we have nesting birds in our bird boxes.
Yes.
Do they fly away and find a partner in somebody else's garden so they can, vary the gene pool? Or are they, do they stick around to what they know?
I
don't know the answer.
No, I know. It's a lovely question, and hopefully we will find out. Thank you, Judith. So the birds, the garden birds, are they generational? So the garden birds we see today, will they be the descendants of the garden birds we saw yesterday, metaphorically speaking? And is there a name for people who love epic feats of engineering, like viaducts and bridges? And you may have to narrow it down. It may, for example, not include cranes, but it would include some of the things that are chimneys, those old brick chimneys. Just I don't know. We'll find out. Jack is in St Albans. Jack, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on, Jack.
So this has been done with a huge amount of hope in the listeners. So years ago, I had some brain operations, and the surgeon came to take photos of my ears before the operation so they could navigate around my brain. Was he pulling my leg?
No, he was photographing your ear. Sorry, that was pathetic. So he said to you, I need to take a photo of your ear in order to know where I'm going when I am in your brain. I mean, this was brain surgery, was it? Literally.
Yeah, this brain. Yeah, so I'm a huge amount of hope in the quality of your listeners today.
You certainly are. I mean, because it really is brain surgery. I mean, I could do the joke at this point, but I think it's too obvious even for me to make the point. We really are looking for a brain surgeon who could tell us whether or not the photograph of your ear. So trying to put you at their ease, or trying to put you at your ease or something like that, as opposed to actually telling the truth. Because we're trying to think of why it might be the case that you would take a photograph of an ear in order to do brain surgery. Did they cut? I mean, how did they go into your brain, if you don't mind me asking? I don't want to...
They cut so I've got a large scar on top of my forehead.
Right.
Where they cut through, drilled and removed part of your skull.
Yeah.
And then navigated around the brains from there.
Wow. Okay. We will find out. Jack was told by his brain surgeon... I'll tell you what, Jack. It's not exactly rocket science, this, is it?
No.
Sorry.
No, it's not rocket science.
No, I'm sorry. Jack was told by his brain surgeon that that his ears need to be photographed before the surgery could go ahead. What is going on there? And was it accurate? 0345 6060 973. And I think probably for the first time ever, we will have to stipulate that you need to be a brain surgeon or someone who has had it explained to them by a brain surgeon in order to answer Jack's question. The number you need to do either is 0345 6060 973. Rob's in Durham. Rob, question or answer?
It's a question, James, please.
Carry on, Rob.
Okay, I used to work in early life for British Coal, an industry that no longer exists.
Yes.
And I contributed to the pension fund.
Yes.
And I know the pension fund's got lots of money in it, unlike most. It got me thinking, obviously, the pensioners, the beneficiaries are dying off.
Yes.
Eventually, it's going to get down to one or two people left as beneficiaries.
Yes.
So do they get all of the money? Or does the government get any surplus that's left when they all die out? Or does the king get it?
So... yeah. Descendants? Do you pass it on to your...
but they'll die.
Yeah. So it just goes, there's one pass. It doesn't get handed down through the... Of course it doesn't. That would be absurd, wouldn't it?
Yeah. It would go to the wife, but obviously the wife would be old and she would die eventually, sadly.
So a pension... What happens to a pension fund when all the beneficiaries have passed away?
Oh, there's one left.
Yeah. All the what happens to a pension fund when there's way more money than any of the surviving pensioners could possibly ever receive or need? That's an incredible question. I mean, it might not be. We might both end up sounding stupid, Rob, but I'll take the flak on this one.
Okay.
But it is an incredible. I mean, I'd never thought of that before. I mean, in the absence of a Robert Maxwell figure who comes along and nicks the lot, it presumably applies to all pension funds.
Well, most of them haven't got money in, but the government in the budget repaid £1.5 billion into the mine workers scheme that they'd creamed off over the years.
Yeah, okay. It's on the board. I love that question, and a lot of people do as well. 12:15 is the time. Some breaking news for you, but rather unpleasant, I have to warn you. Mr. Justice Goose has just ordered the Southport killer Axel Rudakabana to leave the dock as he was shouting repeatedly during his sentencing hearing at Liverpool Crown Court. So he was taken to hospital earlier this morning, reportedly for medical reasons. He now finds himself in the dock at Liverpool Crown Court, where his conduct has prompted Mr. Justice Goose, who will begin his sentencing remarks, I think, at about 2:00. This is the sentencing hearing, the moment to be removed from the dock. More on that possibly as it develops. The time now is 12:16.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 18 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the questions continue and so far include, is there a name for somebody who is drawn to feats of epic engineering? Emma includes big artworks in this, like the sort of Angel of the North and similar, but most obviously I'm thinking about bridges and viaducts, and I love it when we do things like this on the programme, because you start sending me loads of pictures, including of ones that I haven't actually seen before. But is there a name for fans of such feats? That's a nice little turn of phrase, fans of such feats. Do garden birds stick around generationally? So the garden birds that we will be counting this weekend as part of the Great Bird Watch, will they be the descendants of the garden birds that we counted 10 years ago? That's a lovely question from Judith. When Jack was having brain surgery, the surgeon told him he had to take pictures of his ears as an aid to the surgery later. Was he just teasing Jack? I mean, having a bit of fun to put Jack at his ease? Or was that real? Is that what you do? And if so, why? And Rob's question has really got a few of us thinking. When a pension pot contains way more money than the surviving pensioners could ever receive, what happens? The number to call, if you can answer any of those questions, is 0345 6060 973. And as I say, that rather, grim news, if you like, from Liverpool Crown Court about the Southport killer now being taken out of court. I'll keep you up to date with anything that happens in that space as well, not least because there have been cases in the past, haven't there, where the convicted killer has not been in the dock for the sentencing, and it can sometimes feel as though that denies the families of the victims a degree of seeing justice to be done. You know that phrase, justice must be seen to be done. So we'll keep an eye on that as well. 20 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Ivan is in Boreham Wood. Ivan, question or answer?
Hello, James. It's a question. Lovely to talk to you.
Carry on.
I love pickled cucumbers. I eat them all the time.
Me too.
But this is a question.
Yeah.
I open the jar. There's always one, sometimes 1.5 cucumbers out of the vinegar at the top.
Yes.
And I always throw it away.
Do you?
So, yeah, I do, because it's got the vinegar. And I always think, well, it can't be preserved then, can it? So it must be something wrong. So I throw it straight in the bin. So my question is, do I have to?
No, you don't. This is a brand new jar that we're talking about?
Brand new jar that I buy from a well-known supermarket.
Which one?
Often it's top one, sometimes it's top two.
So what happens when you open the brand new jar?
Well, they look horrible.
No. What happens?
Oh, it clicks. I mean, it's
what's that? It's not a click, is it?
It's a seal.
Because?
It's airtight.
Correct.
Ah. That's the answer, is it?
Yeah, because it would need to, in order for the process of deterioration to occur, it would have to have more oxygen in there than it has. And the fact that it's airtight means that there isn't any. The fact that it pops like it does means that there is little or no in there.
This means I don't need to throw them away anymore.
No, but I understand your squeamishness, oddly. So, do you want to know what I do sometimes?
Say that one again, James. I didn't hear you.
I understand your squeamishness. So here's what you could do: is that you could store the jar upside down.
Wow.
Because for example, if you're making a dirty martini, then you need the juice out of your olives. So you put a little bit of the brine from your olive jar into your cocktail shaker before making your dirty martini, and that means that sometimes the level of brine will be lower than the level of olives in your jar, even after you've opened them.
Right.
So in those moments, I have found it to be helpful in the past to then store the olive jar upside down. So the bits poking out of the brine take it in turns. It's a vacuum. The jar is a vacuum when you open it. As soon as you've opened it, it's not a vacuum. But I do that. It may not make any difference at all, but it just makes me feel a bit less squeamish about the ones that are kind of poking above the waterline.
You've saved me lots of money because I literally always throw away the ones out.
Well, how many gherkins do you get through?
Easily a jar a week.
Sure, what, a big jar, a little jar?
A big jar.
Do you eat them? Do you eat them like unaccompanied?
No.
What do you have them with? A bit of pâté?
No.
What?
I do eat them with most meals.
What? Just on the side? You have a few gherkins?
Absolutely.
The big ones?
Yeah, big ones.
Not the little cornichon?
They really are big, sort of. Yeah.
What, about as big as your hand? About half the size of your hand? As big as your fist?
No, not that
Not
big.
the big burger ones, not the pickles, but the gherkins. Yeah. All right. Love
Pickled gherkins. Oh, in fact, I've got one here. I just realised. I bought that wrong. Pickled gherkins with chilli.
Oh, dear. Well, be careful there, Ivan.
I will be.
Serious. I mean it. Tread carefully. Round of applause for me on that one. There we go. I've said it before, I'll say it again. All human life is here. 12:24 is the time. Raj is in Manchester. Raj, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Thank you. Well done. You got there in the end.
I forgot who you were then, no, didn't I?
If
by the way,
only.
I don't like pickled anything, so...
If only. Do you not?
No, not a big fan at all.
Fair enough. Welcome to Pickle Hour with James O'Brien on LBC. What do you have? Question or answer, Roger? What's your question?
It's still a question I've got. It's this. Now, is one blood group better than another? As in, is one more healthier than the other one? Is one genetically better than the other one?
Well, I mean, the more popular ones, it's easier to find blood for a transfusion, I suppose, isn't it? If it's
Not for that reason, though. Not for that reason.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
saying, like, is one genetically better than the other?
So you mean like petrol? You mean like petrol? Like petrol? Is there a premium? Is there a premium blood?
Yes,
group?
I guess so. Yeah. I guess so. So is one more superior than the other? Is one going to give you less of a heart attack, or one going to give you live longer?
An interesting question.
Or something.
Why do you want to know?
Well, I'm B positive, and that's quite a rarish one because it can be used for others. I think other people.
Oh yeah, okay.
So that's quite good. However, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best one. Not that you can choose anyway, because obviously you are what you are. But I'm just intrigued to know: is there one which is better than the other genetically? Is one more healthier than the other? Let's say that then. I guess.
No, I understand what you're asking. So any measurable benefit according to blood group?
Yes. Oh, yeah. That's exactly how I should have phrased it.
It's all right, mate. This is my job.
Yeah.
So we'll put that on the board. Thank you, Raj. 25 minutes after 12 is the time. Does blood group bestow any measurable health benefit? I've never even wondered about that. I don't even know what blood group I am. Should I know what blood group I am, Keith? Should I? Why? Can't they tell really easily if I end up in hospital? Or what are you? What are you? Are you? Ooh. And is that displayed anywhere? If you arrive in hospital unconscious, will people know that? It'll be on your medical records, won't it? Yeah. Well, I don't know. I digress slightly, but not as much as we did about gherkins. Nicholas is in Wimbledon. Nicholas, question or answer?
Hi, James.
Hello,
I got a question.
Go on, then.
If a pink flamingo landed in my back garden
and
I fed it, what colour would it be?
Well, what are you going to feed it?
Well, I got some like cabbage and peas. I got some pickles too.
Okay.
But I haven't got anything live.
Well, it would go white.
Really?
Yeah. Well, unless you gave it the sort of seafood which contains the pink colouring that, as far as I'm aware, this has turned into an episode of that show that, not the one Victoria Corrin does, the other one, the one that Sandy Toksvig does, hasn't it? Is it where Alan Davis gets the thing going off behind him because he's buying into something that everybody thinks is true but isn't. But I think you're asking the question because you, like me, think that flamingos are pink because of the seafood that they eat.
Yeah. Can you change it? Can you change it another colour? That's flamingo.
I think you. I mean, if you fed it Sunny Delight, it would probably go orange. But I think if it doesn't get the seafood, I mean, there are flamingos that aren't pink.
What do they eat?
I don't know what they eat. I just know what colour they are. They presumably eat seafood that's not pink. It's not got that. It's not cochineal, is it? That's in beetles.
Okay. What colour are them flamingos? Them other coloured ones?
White. I mean, to be fair, if a flamingo landed in your garden in Wimbledon, you'd probably not really be supposed to feed it at all. You'd have to phone. I don't know where it would be. Would it be Chessington World of Adventures or
Flamingo Land?
Where's that? That's nowhere near you, is it?
That's in the north.
Yeah, so it would have come a long way. I don't know. I'll put it on the board, Nicholas. But I don't. Okay. And it may be that it is one of those things that we think we all know but don't know. 28 minutes after 12. A quick word, I think, with Chris Chambers, who's LBC's correspondent outside Liverpool Crown Court, about. I mean, it's an unprecedented case in many ways, Chris. But some of the conduct this morning, some of the news breaking this morning is also unexpected and unlikely. What can you tell us about the delay so far?
Afternoon, James. This hearing was due to get underway at 11 o'clock. It actually got underway at 11:50. There had been a delay. Various reports that Axel Ruder-Cabana had been taken to hospital this morning. We've since been told by Merseyside Police that is incorrect and was wrongly reported. That has been cleared up, but certainly there was a delay. But when Axel Ruder-Cabana came into the courtroom, he didn't speak. He sat down. He had his head beneath his legs, just looking at the floor. Wearing a grey jumper, and didn't say anything. It wasn't until the hearing got underway and the counsel for the prosecution began explaining some of the facts that there was some commotion in the dock, and Axel Ruder-Cabana repeatedly shouting, "I'm not fine, I feel ill." He shouted, "I need to speak to a paramedic, I feel unwell, and you're not giving me any support, Judge." That was interrupted by the judge, who then asked to speak to Axel Ruder-Cabana's lawyer and asked him to calm him down and to say that this hearing would be continuing. That was met with more shouting from the dock. Ruder-Cabana shouting that he was not well, he hadn't eaten for 10 days, he felt ill, he's not going to remain quiet, and eventually he was told by the judge to leave the dock and the hearing would continue without him. One family member who was in court shouted "coward" as he was taken out to the dock, and Ruder-Cabana carried on shouting, he wanted a paramedic, it's not his fault, he feels ill, and "don't continue, Judge," was the last thing he said before he went out. So obviously a lot of disruption. He will be asked to return to court after the lunch break, which is due to happen between 1 and 2. But whether or not he comes back, that is unclear. But certainly he was not willing for that hearing to start without making his point, and ultimately resulted in him being taken away.
Chris Chambers, thank you very much. Live, as I said, from LBC, from Liverpool Crown Court, where Chris Chambers, LBC's correspondent, is keeping a close eye on proceedings as the Southport killer Axel Ruder-Cabana faces sentencing, although possibly, as you've heard, not literally. And it's interesting, the family member shouting "coward," that's what I was trying to articulate to you shortly before Chris came on, when I said that sometimes when the accused or the convicted in a case like this refuses or declines to be in the dock for the sentencing, it can feel as though the families of victims can often feel as though they're being denied some element of the justice process, and I think that is probably best expressed by the family member who shouted "coward" at this character as he was ushered out of the court at the judge's instruction. It's 12:31. Tim Humphrey has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
We haven't got an answer to my favourite question in a while. Is there a name for people who are excessively fond of extraordinary feats of human engineering? Viaductophiles, for example, but it can't be that because that would be too specific to viaducts. It would also, I think, be a blend of Latin and Greek, which is quite rare in the English language, although other examples include television. This is what you tune in for, isn't it? This is the premium content. And speaking of premium content, is there a blood group that bestows specific advantages in the way that a premium petrol or premium diesel is supposedly better than the bog standard stuff? Are there blood groups that are better than other blood groups? Do garden birds stay local? In other words, are the ones that we see today related to the ones that we saw 10 years ago? I've got the question about brain surgery, about pensions. The only one I've dealt with, somewhat embarrassingly, was the question about gherkins and possibly the one about flamingos. 12:36 is the time. Remember, if you've no idea what I'm talking about, you can listen back on Catch Up, where you can pause and rewind live radio, particularly valuable perhaps during Mystery Hour. James is in Norwich. James, question or answer?
I'm going to attempt to answer Judith's query regarding garden birds.
Good man, thank you.
Right, well, basically, it depends on what kind of bird you're talking about. The small songbirds,
yes,
they have pretty high mortality rates. I'm looking out in my garden now, seeing little wren flustering about, and that'll do well to live for a year or two. But I suppose the whole thing with nature and birds is they just attempt to keep their progeny alive. So it's the next generation. It's all about the next generation.
But will the next generation be in the same vicinity? Will that too be popping up in your garden in the not too distant future?
Well, very much so. I mean, I've got a bunch of house sparrows, which I didn't have about 10 years ago, and they're very family orientated, and they like to nest together as a group, and as soon as that family group breaks down, then they tend to go off. But they are pretty territorial, like, for example, robins.
Do they migrate? Do sparrows migrate? They don't migrate. Do house sparrows migrate?
No, they don't.
So they're all year round. So you've got like a community of house sparrows, and they're constantly growing. Or do they stay the same size?
Well, depending on predation, depending on food, depending on if anybody's going to put astroturf down or anything, or destroy the habitat, that could affect their chances. But I have to say, James, I hate to disappoint you. You were talking about you saw a lesser-spotted woodpecker.
You think I didn't? Was it a greater-spotted woodpecker that I saw?
Dendrocoppus major.
Yeah, I think you might be right. And I must have misremembered. I was only trying to show off some esoteric knowledge that I had. Only relatively recently. You will already know this, but I thought lesser-spotted referred to its plumage. Don't laugh at me like don't flipping heck. That was such a condescending laugh, James. Keith, turn that off. I've never felt so condescended to on my own programme before. Lots of people thought that it referred to plumage. Hands up if you thought it referred to plumage. No, actually, be careful. You don't want to do an Elon Musk. I thought it referred to plumage, but it doesn't. It refers to how rare it is, how unlikely you are to spot it. So I obviously saw a greater spotted woodpecker, didn't I?
Well, a greater spotted is regarding the plumage. A greater spotted is a lot larger bird. Your lesser spotted is about the size of your, going back to the house sparrows. It's a small.
Does it refer to how often you see it? How often you see it?
No.
Well, what is it then? Bigger and smaller.
Regarding the plumage.
So I was right.
Yeah.
So why did you laugh at me in such a condescending fashion?
It's because you went up about 2 octaves.
Oh, because I read recently that it's called lesser spotted because you see it less often. That was also condescending. So you've actually managed to be condescending to me when I was right and condescending to me when I was wrong.
I can't believe I've out-condescended James O'Brien.
I was about to say, it's supposed to be me that's condescending, and you got a round of applause for it. I never got. Are you 100% sure that it refers to the plumage and not to the frequency of sightings?
Pretty sure, because a few years ago, lesser spotted were relatively common. Again, they're a red list species,
Well, I know then maybe I did see one. Maybe I did see a lesser spotted then.
No, I very much doubt it.
Why?
Where did you see it?
Boston Manor Park.
Unlikely.
Why? And you've never even been there.
They're just so rare. You've got bird watchers that can go for years without seeing one. And I'm a member of a Facebook on lesser spotted woodpeckers.
Are you?
People travel miles to see.
But it doesn't mean you might not accidentally stumble across one on a day out.
Well, I suppose you could. Well, the same as a bloke with a flamingo. I suppose if that lands in your garden, you could have a.
It was quite small. The one that I saw.
Well, how far away from it were you?
About it was at the top of a tree, and I was about 20 yards from the bottom of the tree.
You wouldn't have spotted it being too small if it was a...
no, I heard it. I heard it first.
Well, that's quite a diagnostic. Yeah, depending.
I heard the drumming, and because there's no leaves, because this is the time of year it is, I saw the tiny little thing up at the top of the tree.
Yes, I'm sorry to this.
You're not having
I would doubt that you saw it, but you could have. Done,
but it was. So that would be a greater spotted woodpecker.
Yes, I would.
It wasn't very big. It wasn't very big. I've seen a green one. What's the green one? Oh no, it's a greater spotted. It's a greater spotted one. I've just looked it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been a greater spot. All right. Well, you live and learn, don't you? Hey, what did you ring in about?
The
garden birds. So they will be the robins and things in Judith's back garden will be the grandchildren of the robins that she counted a few years ago.
Yeah, as I say, a robin will tend to live for about 2 or 3 years. They are pretty nest specific, so they will come back to the same place.
Yes. And do the children take over the nest ever, or will they always create a new one, but nearby?
Territorial. They'll try and kick them out, but if the parents die or whatever, then that will open a new opportunity for the offspring to move back to their favourite garden.
That's lovely. Qualifications?
11 levels, 3 A levels, and a BSc and an MSc.
Specifically in the context of ornithology.
Well, I've done various. I've done a few surveys.
So you're a big bird watcher. You don't need any better qualifications than that.
No,
you just love bird watching.
I do. I enjoy it. Yeah.
And you're quite well placed for it. There. Do you get out to Snettisham and Titchwell Marsh much, and places like that?
Yeah, well, Strumpshaw Fen. We tend to go. Yeah.
I used to get up to Norfolk more often than I do now, and that's where I actually developed my enthusiasm for ornithology. Although obviously it's not as well developed as yours, is it?
No, but it's an interest, James. That's where it starts. It's all about
I know it does. As I get older and to spend more time outside London, it's something I look forward to doing even more. Have a round of applause on me. I'm up in Scotland later this year in a place where I may see there's a good chance of seeing not just a golden eagle but also otters. I've never seen otters in the wild. I know before anyone asks me that otters aren't birds. Thank you. Jan's in Alconbury. Jan, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on, Jan.
I fear that I'm going to lower the bar on mystery, although with this one...
Mate, did you hear the question about gherkins?
It might be better than that, then.
Yeah, you'll be absolutely fine, I suspect. I really do.
Right, I'm going to shoot anyway. So if you've got someone who's committed a crime and they end up going to court, and sometimes for perhaps a multitude of reasons, that the case gets dropped, and it's sometimes referred to as they got away with it scot-free.
Yes.
I'd like to know what the Scot is, what it refers to.
I know this.
Go on.
And I know it because it's come up before. It's one of my favourites, actually, because it's got nothing to do with Scotland, which will surprise you.
Yeah.
Well, I think it will surprise you. It's Norse, as is so often the case with the puzzling etymology that doesn't look immediately classical. It doesn't look Latin. It doesn't look like a Romance language, and it doesn't look Greek or Latin. It's Norse. And the word Scot literally just meant a tax. So you get away scot-free. It means you haven't paid your Scot.
Staggering,
isn't it?
Great. I've been dying to ask that for weeks as well.
It's a great question. I love it.
I can sleep now.
There we go. Fantastic. And I think that one might even be included in the Mystery Hour ball game. But you'd have to come up with a better answer to persuade people. That's how the game works. That you'd come up with a fake answer that was more convincing than the answer I've just given. And a good fake answer on that would probably involve bringing Scotland into it. Because it appears, I think the phrase appears in Macbeth, if memory serves, but it is not Scottish in origin. It's not Scotch. You're on. Thank you. Round of applause for me. 12:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
2 messages here from 2 different people who both display the depth of commitment to the programme that I expect from everybody, frankly, moving forward. The first is from Sarah, who knits together today's programme only, but in a way that I find charming. She writes, James, I'd like to know if that flamingo that landed in that guy's garden would turn green if it was fed on the other guy's pickled cucumbers. It's a very good question, Sarah, in Macclesfield. And Jason, knitting together one of the finest traditions this programme has ever produced, when he says, I saw an otter once, James. It was in Essex. Rayleigh, I think it was. Yeah, you should be able to get that for yourself. Jeremy's in Cobham. Jeremy, question or answer?
Answer, I think.
Go on then.
To the pension question.
Yes.
So if his, I don't know the details of his particular pension.
It's a coal board pension. So
yeah,
go on.
If it's a pension pot,
yes,
then 100% of it goes to his.
No,
spouse.
it's not. He gets a payment from the central fund.
He's got to probably given the age of that fund. He's on a defined benefit, not defined contribution.
Yeah.
So the fund can be over or underfunded. So there isn't. So he would already be receiving the correct amount of money.
But what the question clearly?
Yes.
Sorry, not clearly, but the question specifically is when there's hardly anybody left.
Right, it still would go to their spouse, but only 50%.
But even when the spouse isn't there anymore, but there's still lots of money in the fund.
Yeah, but they would pay it down. They pay it down.
What does that mean?
How many people are left? So they might they'd overpay people out.
So when they begin to think that the end is nigh for the entire fund, then the individual payments that everybody gets would go up accordingly.
Or they might try and pay people to move it into pension pots. So it was in a fund where there were only 7 people left.
Right, yes, okay.
And it was so expensive for them to administer the fund that they paid us a big amount of money to move it into a private pension pot.
A lump sum.
And then it would go to... Sorry?
A lump sum, as it were.
Yeah, so it goes into a self-administered pension pot. And they give you a multiple. So suppose your final salary is £10,000 a year. They might give you £300,000. But the multiplier is between 30 and 40 times normally.
Okay. Qualifications, I think I can guess.
Well, I was a fund manager for a while, but
and you manage pension funds. Yeah, manage pension funds. There you go. So you get a round of applause, but don't go away.
Okay.
Because I want to read this from Paul, who says, I can't call in as my voice is not a radio voice. I don't know what you mean by that, Paul, nor is mine. But anyway, I'm an IFA who has worked with the mine workers pension scheme. It's a defined benefit scheme, meaning members get a pension for life and possibly one for their spouse or final dependents up to a certain age. The money in the pot is supposed to be enough to provide all benefits for all members. Once all members, eligible spouses, partners and dependents are deceased, if there is any surplus, then the sponsoring employer is entitled to claim that back subject to a tax charge. The sponsoring employer was British Coal, but the government has since stepped in as guarantor, so if there was any money, it would ultimately go back to them. This is contrary to money purchase schemes, where the pot of money is allocated to the member and they nominate beneficiaries who inherit the fund on death, and the beneficiaries can then nominate people to take it after their death, successors and so on. If there are no beneficiaries, then it's up to the trustees who get. I don't think that. So, between the two of you, you've completely smashed that question.
I missed the final bit, but but generally, they would never leave enough. They would draw the fund down to pay out, so they wouldn't. So if it went back to the government, there wouldn't be much of it.
No, perfect answer. I love that. Between the two of you, that's. I mean, crikey! No wonder you charge such exorbitant fees, Jeremy. Have a round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ray's in North Walsham, back to Norfolk. Question or answer?
Hello, James. It's a question.
Carry on, Ray.
Yeah, basically, it's another bird question, I'm afraid to say. But
it would be. We like bird questions.
Why is it that when the farmer starts ploughing a field, from absolutely nowhere, a flock of seagulls appear?
Yeah.
Obviously going for the worms and that sort of thing, but it doesn't have to be near the coast. It could be anywhere in the country. How do they know that he's ploughing that field?
Well, I mean, they tell each other.
Yeah, there's no sign of them anywhere.
But they're scavengers. Well, there would be. You're just not going to notice them. They're scavengers. They're flying around. They've probably developed some knowledge now that when they see a tractor ploughing a field, there's going to be a payout, in the same way that when they see someone walking up the seafront with a bag that's got the logo of a Cornish pasty shop on it, they know that there's a big payout on the way as well. And I mean, you could say the same about fruit flies almost. Where do they come from when you leave a banana peel out in your kitchen? How can there be so many of them so quickly? So they just sort of pass it on.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking even inland, I know there's a load of seagulls about in the country.
They go to rubbish tips and stuff like that.
Scavengers, as you're saying, is correct, but it just seems baffling that all of a sudden, from nowhere, a big flock suddenly appear.
Yeah. All right, I'll put it on the board, but it's going to be close to my answer, even if it's not 100% correct, because there's no other theory that fits the facts that are available. Farmer starts ploughing a field where there are no seagulls visible, but there must be some seagull in the vicinity because he gets wind of the ploughed field, comes and checks it out, dashes off to tell his mates, word soon spreads, next thing you know, you've got a flock of seagulls.
But if he's in the middle of Manchester or miles and miles inland,
they live on anything that looks like a cliff. They don't need to be near the sea. That's that they've adapted. Right. So that's why you find them near rubbish tips and indeed near inland farms as well. It's a bit of a misnomer that they are only to be found by the sea. That's actually one of the most perfect uses of the word misnomer that I've ever witnessed, let alone delivered. Right, I think I'm right. I could be wrong. I'll find out for you, Ray. All right?
Cheers. Thank you very much, Steve.
Right.
Thank you. Cheers.
Everything all right in North Walsham, is it? Lovely part of the world.
Lovely, yeah, apart from it's raining and wet and cold.
Yeah, but that's got nothing to do with the topography and the landscape and the lovely wildlife that you've got on your doorstep, Roy. Flipping heck, there's no pleasing some people. Nigel's in Truro. Nigel, question or answer?
Answer, please.
Carry on.
Hello, James. Enjoying your programme. First time caller. I used to work as a teenager at Dudley Zoo the 1960s.
My goodness me.
I was a part-timer and I started on the go-karts at 14 and eventually... which didn't need much feeding except petrol.
You've done that one before.
I haven't, no. I haven't told this story before ever.
Go on.
I'm used to telling the odd story. But anyway, we had a new arrival when I was allowed to become a part-time zookeeper at 15, I think it was.
Yeah.
I worked on the Bear Ravine section for about a year, and then eventually got sent to other sections. But however, there was a story that they were going to be receiving a new stock of animals, and it was all excited, and it was called pink flamingos.
Yes.
Eventually, I can't remember the exact year, but they arrived, and there they were on the slopes of the side of Dudley Castle, where Dudley Zoo is, looking absolutely glorious. Keepers all from the bird section, all very busy, and you'd meet them during lunchtimes or breaks, and they'd chat about the challenges and what they were doing and how the stock was going as it had just arrived. And there was a big issue about how to retain their pink colouring.
Right.
And they came up with keratin as a food additive.
Yes, okay.
Which I haven't researched, but I believe to be obviously from the word carrot. So
or the other way around. It's a bit orange. Yeah, go on.
They did look a bit scruffy, having arrived in brand new kind of slopes of muddy old the side of Dudley Castle. But the following year, they looked a lot brighter. So I was never allowed to work on the bird section.
But you think it worked?
You know, I think it did work, but I left there to go full time at Jersey Zoo for Gerald Durrell at 19.
Did you really?
Yes, I did.
And did you stay in this field for the rest of your career?
No, I didn't. My father became extremely ill back in Midland.
So back to Dudley.
I had to come back to Dudley to help my mother, and my father subsequently died. But I'd always had animals and music in my life.
How lovely! How lovely!
And, I got a part-time job up at a little music shop in Dudley I'd known since I was a youngster and got my first guitar. And as I'd been writing poetry as a youngster, I eventually ended up as a musician, singer-songwriter. But that's another issue. But
I look forward to that. I look forward to a question coming up that means we can explore that part of your life, Nigel. But in the meantime, you get a lovely round of applause.
Thank you.
No, thank you. The beta carotene. I think Lenny Henry did his first ever public performance in one of the hospitality suite at Dudley Zoo.
Yes, he did at Dudley Zoo. It was called Queen Mary's Ballroom. I think.
Yeah, something like that. I did get popped up on Full Disclosure when I had the pleasure of having Lenny in the studio for that. Thank you, Nigel. Well, lovely. Beta carotene would be a suitable substitute for whatever it is that's in the seafood that turns the flamingos pink. Did you ever see a flamingo that was pink? Think. Lewis is in Putney. Quickly, Lewis, quickly. Bring it home. Bring it home, Lewis.
So it's an answer on the blood question.
Yes.
So are there some advantages? Yes, there are, basically, in a nutshell. There are certain blood groups that clot more frequently. Like
What's the best? What's the premium grade blood?
I'd say O positive.
That's what Keith. Keith's got that. Is that quite a popular one?
Stuff. I think it's the best.
I don't know what mine is, actually. We should get scarves and badges. Qualifications?
I have a degree in medical genetics.
We didn't get the brain surgery question answered, did we? But hey-ho, nobody's perfect. Round of applause for Lewis, please. That's it from me for another day. Can we see if Emma has got one? If Emma in Ashfield, who asked, she didn't get an answer either, the question about epic feats of engineering. I don't know whether she's already got one. If she hasn't, can we give it to her, please? That's it from me for another day. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including the brand new James O'Brien Daily. How much longer can we say brand new for? Vanessa Phelps, what do you think?
Till the end of this week, and
is
then
it
no
just
longer.
another week? It's like Happy New Year.
One more
it?
day. That's
exactly that. The best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now, as you may have gathered, standing in for Sheila Fogarty, it's Vanessa Phelps.
James O'Brien on LBC.